Arc 5, Stars What Make History. Chapter 5, The Watergate City Pristella. Upon their arrival, Subaru and the others are greeted by towering, grand walls. Subaru, yeah, this looks exactly like the prison I expected it to. Mutters Subaru as he pokes his head out of the carriage window, Otto at the reins. Beatrice captures Subaru's muttering, her head also out the window beneath Subaru. Beatrice, Joshua said it was a sightseeing spot, but Betty doubts that, in fact. It looks far more depressing than relaxing, I suppose. Subaru, agreed. I mean, I guess the bridge and gates and stuff are kinda cool. Subaru nods in agreement to Beatrice and looks down. Their carriage is traveling across the massive, stone Tigressy bridge, which leads to the front gates of Pristella. Subaru stretches slights and looks over to the horizon, where he sees sunlight glinting on the water. To him it looks like an ocean, but since oceans don't exist in this world, it has to be a lake or a river. Beatrice, Pristella is a city built upon a lake, in fact. The land inside those walls becomes so flat that it forms a basin in the center, I suppose. If you envision the city as an old trap, then of course you'd expect the center to easily flood, in fact. Subaru, you mean that thing about it being a trap for some nasty witch beast? Amelia mentioned that too. Is it actually true though? Beatrice, this is my first time seeing this place, and I don't know what the specific purpose of it was either, I suppose. But I suspect it is true, now that I've seen it, in fact. Beatrice's bluish eyes gaze at the city's gates beyond the bridge. The walls keep her from peering inside, but she must be imagining what the city looks like. It's unclear how precisely the books in the Forbidden Archive spoke of the world, but Beatrice's extensive knowledge has helped on more than a few occasions. Beatrice, why are you stroking Betty's head, I suppose? Subaru, because it's there. I want to spend all the time patting you that I'm able. Beatrice, utter nonsense and patronizing, undesired nonsense at that, in fact. Nevertheless, Beatrice neglects to swat Subaru's hand away, and he proceeds to pat her more while gazing past the bridge railing, at the lake. The pristine waters give him a clear view to the bottom of the lake, with not a single piece of litter or pollution in sight. If the whole lake is like this, it's an example of incredible ethics. Subaru, actually I didn't notice any litter or illegally dumped industrial waste on the road either. Probably cause people don't have much stuff, but still it's nice. Otto, Pristella is particularly strict on littering since it has to preserve its landscape. There will be a simple border check once we enter the gates, please don't get weirdly assertive and reject the binding paperwork they give you. Warns Otto, having caught Subaru's muttering. Subaru tilts his head. Subaru, paperwork? Amelia, I think you're usually exempted from it if you have a crest on your carriage when you're going to the capital, but absolutely everyone has to fill out paperwork to enter Pristella. Subaru nods, impressed, and more or less accepts it as a passport and customs check. But once again he tilts his head at the words binding paperwork. Subaru, is it written on paper that makes you geese yourself? Like it does something to your OD once you sign, and the second you break the terms your gate stops working or something. Amelia, eek, that'd be so scary, there shouldn't be anything that forceful. The paperwork is just a statement that you won't do anything bad. But it means your conscience will be keeping a close eye on you. Subaru, we'd have world peace if everyone were as strict on themselves as you, Amelia Tan. Subaru smiles wryly, aware of his own scummy personality, at Amelia's idealism. Either way, he understands that there is paperwork, and that it is not actually binding. Otto, there are nationals laws that must be upheld, but the mayor and lord who manage the city have rather extensive authority there. There are many things about Pristella that simply differ from national law. The paperwork will surely mention what they are, so please refrain from mocking it and actually read it. Garfield, a goddamn pain. How about you read it and tell us what it said when you're done? Otto, you'll never mature with that attitude. It's necessary for you to learn how to at least skim paperwork, what with your social position. You can't just stockpile bizarre trivia from the books you like. Garfield, it ain't bizarre trivia, man's lust fair dramatic. Yeah, Captain? Subaru, you got it. Garfield balances precariously on the carriage roof as he peeks his head over and down. Subaru nods firmly in reply, Otto sighs, and Amelia watches happily. Beatrice shakes her head in lamentation. Beatrice, you two children are just impossible, in fact. Otto, they are a nightmare to herd. Who could guess how Beatrice's statement resounded with him? Unfortunately for him, no one else in the carriage is capable of empathizing with his grief and exhaustion. Patrash roars, and everyone directs their attention to the front. The gates of Pristella stand directly before them. The border inspection ends with underwhelming ease. Amelia and Otto were right. The paperwork described the terms they would have to follow to enter the city, and the rules by which they needed to abide once inside. That said, every term was practically impossible to accidentally violate, so there's no need to pay that much conscious attention to them. All you have to do to enter the city is read the paper, sign your name, and get the officer's approval. The officers did panic a little once Amelia introduced herself, but being that Anastasia passed through here too, they probably figure that something is going on. Subaru, guess it is pretty big news to have two girls with the right to the throne in one place. Amelia, there wasn't too much fuss, so I think Anastasia let them know beforehand. Or maybe it was Joshua-kun or Mimi-chan. Subaru, Joshua feels possible if you ignore his clumsiness, but I seriously doubt it was Mimi. It doesn't feel like the cat girl has that kind of sensibility. But not because she's selfish or anything. How to describe it? Subaru, 'cause she's cute. Amelia, yes, because she's cute. And it's so mysteriously persuasive that it makes Amelia nod. Subaru crosses his arms, finding that no other word fits. Also for some reason Beatrice stomps on his foot. Subaru kills his time by placating a displeased Beatrice, until Otto and Garfield finally finish their drawn-out inspection and join the others beyond the gates. Subaru, hey guys. What held you up? Otto, Garfield did. I've been constantly telling him to practice his writing and still. Subaru, Garfield, you can't write? Garfield, I can. It's just, puttin' it how you would call it avant-garde or, whatever. Meaning his handwriting is so horrendous that the officers couldn't read it. The officers must have offered to write for their illiterate client, but Garfield's pride would not allow it. Subaru, I won't say anything against you, but you better study if you don't want this to happen again. I know you write letters to Louis-san, and those ones have to be legible. Garfield, now there's a joke, Captain. Me and Granny go way back. My nana can read anything my amazing self writes, even if it's with my left hand. Subaru, you aren't thinking to improve at all, are you? Says Subaru, sighing in exhaustion to a proud Garfield. Garfield's grandmother Louise is not living with him in Roswell's mansion. She and the 24 duplicates have been tasked with duties in various forests in Roswell's domain. Amelia and Garfield still hold the command right for the doubles, and their orders still reach the doubles from a distance. The team is trying to utilize this, and have the girls serve as middlemen for communicating orders. Subaru proposed the idea, and Louis carries the responsibility for the work. Garfield opposed it all at first, but generally agrees with it now. And so Louis and the doubles are living in Arlem Village. The plan is to go girl by girl, teaching them everything they need to know, and sending them to towns and villages once they're ready. Subaru, it's like a huge spy operation, which kinda makes it sound bad. But he loathes to simply leave them there, hanging around without any role or purpose. Perhaps Subaru's guilt from discarding them in a previous loop is what spurred the idea. Amelia, Subaru? They finished the bag check for the carriage, let's go? Amelia calls Subaru out of his reverie, and he hurriedly glances up. He gives a strained smile as she looks curiously on and grabs past Ash's reins. As if sensing Subaru's unease, the smart black dragon nuzzles her snout against the back of his neck. It mystifies Subaru how relaxing the rough sensation is. Subaru, thank you for everything. Subaru replies to her silent compassion by stroking her hard scales. Patrash responds with her snout, and Subaru finally tugs the reins to set off for Pristella proper. They exit the front gate to find a river flowing between the exterior gates and the city. They cross the stone bridge over the river, the inner gates open, and Pristella reveals itself. Subaru, whoa. Subaru sighs in admiration at the sight unfolding before him. And he isn't the only one reacting like this. Amelia and Beatrice, seated on either side of him, also express their wonder. He must apologize for using the word jail on this aquatic city. When Subaru first heard about Pristella, he envisioned something like the old world's Venice. He was correct to do so. The city is circular, enclosed in turn by the circular walls. Ignoring the fact that its size is that of a city, its shape is essentially that of a sports arena. The outer rim is the most elevated, elevation dropping the closer you get to the center. Dense rows of stone buildings line the tiers of the city, the most western-seeming architecture that Subaru has seen yet. Large canals run through the town, with notably massive waterways dividing the circular city into 4 even sections. Subaru sees several gondolas paddling on the water, and a tingle shoots down his spine at the thought, gondoliers. The Blue City, the City of Water, the Watergate City Pristella. Each one rings true. The sight brings nothing but wonder. Subaru, amazing. He says, and no one can deny him. The guardsmen at the gates smile in satisfaction at the group's astonishment. Most likely, everyone who passes through these gates reacts exactly the same way. That reaction both fulfills the guardsmen's office-bound obligations, and is the greatest of rewards to them. Definitely is. Right into their trap. Garfield, yeah, this is stunning. So Otto wasn't just spoutin' bullcrap. Garfield recovers from the shock first and rubs the tip of his nose. But his excitement has not faded, for his cheeks remain slightly red. His masculine passion for the dramatic must have been set alight by this amazing place, which falls under the heading of things that are gigantic. Otto, I've always wished to visit this place, connected as it is to the god of merchants, Hoshin, but this is stupendous. It was worth visiting regardless of Hoshin. Otto fidgets with his hands, looking incredibly emotional. The mention of Hoshin reminds Subaru of the name, Hoshin of the Wastes. Subaru, Hoshin's that guy. That one merchant guy from ages ago who made crazy riches from a burnt wasteland. Otto, you're a little off, but overall correct. 400 years ago, Hoshin traveled the yet untamed lands of Kararaji unaided, transformed it into an economic infrastructure using solely his own wits, and made a fortune. The man is a paragon. Solely because it's about a merchant, Otto's eyes blaze with passion as he tells the story of Hoshin. If he built the foundations for one of the four great countries, the Kararaji city-state, then Subaru can agree with the legend being passed down. Subaru, Anastasia calls herself Hoshin after him too. Otto, it's very bold of her. I doubt there is any way to more plainly state her enthusiasm and goals, but everyone alive is going to be skeptical. Though I do presently think she has achieved enough to warrant the name. Subaru, if she's seriously doing something to warrant the name, then, well, snagging Lugnika's throne works. Just marching toward her goal. Sincerely impressed, Subaru manages to pry himself from the beautiful scenery. He strokes Beatrice's head and tugs Emilia's sleeve to pull them away from the mesmerizing city. Subaru, so, Anastasia's waiting for us at the Seasylph Lodge. Dunno where it is, but considering who she is, doubt it's someplace cheap. Emilia, right. I think she told the gate officers about the visit too, so it's going to be a nice place. I think Otto Kuhn investigated more into that. Otto nods and hops onto the coachman's platform. He jerks his chin, gesturing to the carriage. Otto, I've supposed the route, so allow me to lead. We won't be able to rush since boats have higher priority than carriages in this town. Which I note because I suspect Natsuki-san still struggles with leisurely carriage rides. Subaru, oh yeah? If it was just Patrash, I wouldn't even have to say anything, just stare at her in my trembling boots, and she'd have the carriage doing whatever I want. Right. Subaru boldly gazes at Patrash and winks. Patrash looks away. Somehow, it feels like she just sighed at him. The unexpected reaction dejects Subaru. Emilia consolingly pats his back, while Beatrice takes his hand and files him into the carriage. Garfield, and we're off. Announces Garfield from his new, dedicated perch on the carriage's roof. Otto smiles wryly as he whips the reins, and the carriage rolls into motion. Their pace is truly slow, so sluggish that the drop in speed from the uphill inclines cannot feasibly explain it. Subaru, but going off what I'm seeing out the windows, there really aren't many carriages. Emilia, there aren't. And look how all the roads wide enough for carriages aren't straight, they're windy because the canals have higher priority than streets. Subaru, you're right. Emilia is right. Footpaths and carriage roads make winding detours around the canals, which cross through the city. It is inconvenient, but stops feeling that way once Subaru watches the canals alongside the carriage, and the gondolas passing by. Subaru, carriages have the windbreaker blessing, but do boats have anything? Like a blessing of no capsizing or a sea breeze blessing, something. Emilia, I don't really know, but I don't think the boats themselves have blessings. But maybe the boatsmen have a blessing of lakes or blessing of ferrying. Beatrice, though this knowledge isn't particularly widespread, water dragons have blessings, in fact. One that protects them from the effects of water, much like those of earth dragons, I suppose. Subaru, water dragons. Wouldn't mind seeing one. And just one. Beatrice, I'm sure there's bound to be some in this city, in fact. Though she answers Subaru's question, Beatrice's reply is not proactive, what with her dislike of animals. Her strange awkwardness does not end merely with Patrash, but apparently extends to water dragons. Subaru, I don't think hugging, say, a ligard be that unpleasant. Beatrice, it doesn't kill me not to touch animals, I suppose. Betty is cuter than them, in fact. Subaru, doubt fighting an animal in a match of cuteness go anywhere. Actually, you might lose a few points if you fought on the same terms. To Subaru's eyes, even Patrash looks a combination of cool and cute. But a different kind of cute to Emilia, REM, and Beatrice is cute, of course. Beatrice looks on suspiciously, while Emilia jumps excitedly on the word liger and gazes at Subaru. Emilia, me too. Do you think they'd let me touch them if I asked? Subaru, you could have asked when Mimi was at the mansion. You get weirdly considerate about things like that. Emilia, they're their riding dogs, I can't just do whatever I want with them. I've been missing the feeling of fur, since Puck hasn't been around. It seems that even Amelia, who loves Puck like family, has been enchanted by his fur. Subaru agrees to ask about it and Amelia starts humming happily, while hideously tone deaf. Listening to her shorty humming, Subaru puts his hand to his cheek and leans on his elbow as he gazes at the cityscape. He leans on the window frame. Beatrice gazes out the window's glass, kneeling on her seat. Subaru deliberates whether to tell her that it's bad manners to do that when. Beatrice, oh, Subaru. Here's your chance, in fact. Subaru, HM? WH whoa. Subaru looks over to see a giant spray of water from the canal as a passing fish or no, it's not a fish. The creature has a long, serpentine body, alongside stubby but present limbs. It's a water dragon. Its blue, slippery skin evokes images of snakes, but its head is clearly a dragon's. Sharp fangs crowd its mouth, and catfish whiskers extend from its snout. The earth dragon looks like a bipedal lizard, while the water dragon is more oriental. Subaru almost wants to call it Shenlong. Subaru, but it looks kinda stuck up or unfriendly. Beatrice, that's what it looks like to humans, I suppose. Water dragons are much more bothersome to domesticate than earth dragons, in fact. You must raise it from hatchling to adult before it recognizes you as its master, I suppose. Subaru, so they take time. Me and Patrash bonded the second our eyes met. Beatrice, it baffles me how she's so attached to you, in fact. It baffles Subaru too. Though she is originally from Crush's faction, she grew extremely attached to Subaru from the moment he picked her for the White Whale offensive. Subaru believes his choice back then, picking the highly assertive Patrash, was the correct one. There are so many times where he would have failed without her. Subaru, HMPF. The visage of our Patrash abounds in refinement far the superior. Amelia, Subaru. How come you're suddenly talking like an? A strange rebellion against the water dragon, dancing through the canal, overtakes Subaru. And though the dragon couldn't have noticed his gaze, it turns to glance at him. The dragon pokes its head out of the water and screeches. For some reason Subaru hears that eyes off, interlopers, loud and clear. Subaru, I think this asshole just insulted us. Which means it's time for dragon. As revenge, Subaru decides to mimic the roars of the giant black witch beast he saw when the mansion was burning down. When a sharp, dignified roar cuts through to the water. Patrash's roar. She perceived her master's belligerence toward the dragon and got him revenge. Subaru doesn't know what she meant with that bellow, but her voice and glare terrify the water dragon, which squeaks and slinks back underwater. Then it speeds up and carts its boat swiftly away. The boatsman panics at the sudden speed while Subaru watches on, dazed. Subaru, WH what just happened? Otto, not Suki-san, please keep Patrashjan from doing anything too strange. I'd truly prefer that we didn't make a scene so shortly after entering the city. Scolds Otto from the driver's seat. Subaru waves at him dismissively and whistles through his fingers, so that Patrash can hear him. They can't exactly communicate by whistling, but hopefully it lets her know that he's grateful. Subaru, water dragons are pretty cool, but Patrash is the coolest. Beatrice, ours is better than that undignified water dragon, in fact. Beatrice begrudgingly agrees with Subaru, perhaps because he spoke so happily. While they cross a canal by bridge, Subaru thinks of the panoramic view of the city he saw from the gates. Subaru, feels like these canals split the city into 4 or something. Amelia, they do. The giant waterways in the middle of Pristella divide it into districts. Going clockwise from the main gates, they're District 1, District 2, District 3, and District 4. Subaru hums. Subaru, pretty uncreative naming scheme. They could have gone for something more like East Blue. Don't you agree? Garfield, that I do, Captain. Beatrice, no one cares about your tastes, I suppose. Says Beatrice icily at the happy pair. Amelia smiles as she watches on and raises her finger, speaking as if she has read this in a book. Amelia, the numbered districts all have different stores and occupations, and the residential areas are concentrated in Districts 2 and 3, which are farthest from the gates. The Sea Sylph Lodge must have lots of visiting travelers, so it'll be in District 1. Subaru, which means we should be hitting it soon, or now. The slow carriage comes to a stop during their conversation. Apparently they've reached the inn. Otto loops around from the driver's seat and into the carriage. Otto, we've arrived. I'll speak with the employees to have Frufu and Patrashjan move to the stables, so feel free to, no, actually, please wait by the entrance. Subaru, what changed your mind? Is it really that bad for us to go in first? Otto, it is. We don't want you to encounter Anastasia-san, and for me to come back and find she's hooked you. Subaru frowns at Otto's lack of trust, but nobody can refute him considering their track record. They take their hand luggage and leave the carriage while an employee escorts Otto behind the establishment, out of sight. Subaru watches them go, stretches, and finally directs his gaze to the Seasylph Lodge. Subaru, now, just what kind of lodgings have we? Subaru's jaw drops. Emilia puts her finger to her cheek, tilting her head. Emilia, the building looks so funny. I don't think I've seen one like it. Garfield and Beatrice share Emilia's candid thoughts. But Subaru gets a different impression from the place. Of course he would. After all. Subaru, an inn? This is a ryokan. Built of smooth wood, with sliding glass doors. And hedges, and a gravel path from the gates to the entrance, and a tiled roof, leaving no room for doubt. Right there in the middle of such a western city, an entirely out-of-place piece of architecture. This is the day that Natsuki Subaru meets the Wafa structure called the Seasylph Lodge. Look at the surprise on you. Was a good choice I made, hand-picking this hotel. When a calm, cheerful voice cuts into his stupefaction. Still stunned, Subaru slowly redirects his gaze beyond the hedges, to where someone peers over at their group. She has a white fur dress, and an eye-catching fox scarf. The cold season has already gone, and the dress has fabric thin enough to call in season, but the scarf could be important since it's exactly the same as ever. A slight frame and long, wavy violet hair. A pleasant smile on her charming face, and an indecipherable glint her aquamarine eyes. No doubt about it. This is the one who invited them here. A direct, face-to-face welcome from Anastasia Hashin. And... Anastasia, been some time since I last seen you. Many thanks to you for coming all the way. Figures to me the journey's worn you out. How says we spend time relaxing inside, then chat? Before Otto can return, she easily takes the lead. Everyone present can see so. Chapter 6, 2 Spirit Knights, 2 Greedy Merchants, and 1 Selfless Angel. Contrary to everyone's expectations, Anastasia seemed to be striking a preemptive blow. The atmosphere in the water plumage pavilion tensed. Emilia, thanks for welcoming us in person, it really makes me feel at ease. Coming out to meet Emilia was certainly calculated. While Subaru was lost in thought, a slightly confused Emilia voiced a reply, grabbing his attention. Anastasia cast a frown at Subaru, probably pondering the origins of Garfield, who was standing next to him, and Beatrice, who was clinging to his sleeve. Subaru, having spent many days frolicking with them in the mansion, was steadied by their presence. Anastasia, the same face as always. Asterisk, she has a Kansai dialect. Her gaze left Subaru for Emilia as she murmured to herself, her light green eyes bearing a hint of ridicule. Her relationship with Emilia had changed little in the year past, a small conflict between them wasn't unexpected. Subaru, well, she's just as cute as, no, she's even cuter than before. Emilia, Subaru, don't kid around with such a serious expression. Hearing her response, Subaru rubbed his nose with an air of awkwardness, noting that Beatrice was paying close attention to the proceedings. The corners of Anastasia's mouth lifted in a faint smile. Anastasia, Natsuki-kun, I heard that after the subjugation of the White Whale things went a bit awry. Are Roswell's border territories doing well? Subaru, sorry you had to catch such unpleasant news. Thanks to your troops, we survived the aftermath. As companions, we'll mutually support each other, right? Anastasia, is that so? I'm glad you think so too. The two of us were glad you could come. It's been a while since you've seen Julius, yes? Anastasia clapped her hands together, taking an opportunity to tease Subaru, who immediately caught on and frowned. Emilia and Anastasia laughed simultaneously, as Subaru grew uncomfortable, thinking that neither of them understood his complex relationship with Julius. He tried to explain it over and over to Emilia, but each attempt inevitably ended in failure. Garfield, it's bit strange. Guess the woman's one of Emilia-sama's enemies? The previously silent Garfield voiced a question, making no attempt to conceal his hostility. Subaru scratched his head in helpless embarrassment, and Anastasia's round eyes grew rounder. Emilia, Garfield, you're not wrong, but you're putting it in a pretty extreme way. After all, weren't we invited here? Garfield, yeah, but still, won't ya HAVT stab each other in the back one day? TH is gonna sting after acting all buddy-buddy. Emilia, that's true. Garfield's a gentle person, so I'm worried about that. Garfield, hick. Who's gentle? What are you talking about, Emilia-sama? As expected of him, Garfield hurriedly tried to deflect Emilia's words. Anastasia eyed him curiously, wondering why he seemed so embarrassed when... Garf is here. Miss, why didn't you tell me? The wooden door of the inn was flung open with a bang. The racket was caused by Mimi, a cat girl whose lovely face shone brightly as she saw her audience. She flew into the room and surprised everyone by firmly grasping Garfield's arm. Mimi, welcome. You're tired, so Mimi will guide you to your room. That's where you'll be staying. Hey, you're not budging at all. Garfield, oh oi, wait. My amazing self hasn't agreed, you're strong. What? Mimi, this way. That way. Hurry. The petite Mimi clung to Garfield's arm and, though he should have been strong enough to break free, he was dragged along helplessly nonetheless. Perhaps she was using secret technique, but it's more likely that Garfield didn't want to distance Mimi by shaking her off. After all, despite appearances, they were supposed to be the same age. Anastasia, air. Garfield allowed himself to be dragged away with little resistance, and Anastasia had a rare troubled look on her face, as did Emilia. Anastasia, Mimi has always been lively, but even so, I was a bit surprised just now. Emilia, that's right. That's good. I thought you might have felt she left you alone. Anastasia, not at all, that wouldn't be a problem. However, after their exchange, Anastasia's briefly softened gaze sharpened into a freezing calmness, and Subaru unconsciously moved to stand in front of Emilia. Anastasia, I'd like you to tell me what kind of a child he is, the one who has attracted Mimi's attention. The dangerous question was loaded with the quiet, burning rage a woman would hold toward pests who surrounded her cute daughter or little sister. It subtly conveyed that Mimi was loved, and, although they'd arrived early, the thought of dealing with this left Subaru exhausted. Why is it, Natsuki-san, that you suddenly have such a tired face? At that moment, Otto, who had returned from securing the ground dragons and their carriage, found Subaru in an exhausted state and joined their gathering. Pristella's famed hotel, the Water Plumage Pavilion, was tiled with wooden floorboards resembling tatami mats. This place was clearly geared toward exhausted pedestrians like Subaru, who immediately seated himself on a cushion. Beatrice calmly took a seat next to him, but Emilia and others seemed puzzled at the notion of sitting directly on the floor. The long wooden desk and the large hall were all reminiscent of a Japanese-style inn, excluding the lack of an actual tatami floor. However, a true expert like Subaru found places to detract points. Subaru, for example, this place lacks a sliding door and a paper door, and, unfortunately, the employees are not dressed kimonos. It's poor taste to outwardly resemble a ryokan when the atmosphere is not faithfully reproduced. Ultimately, Subaru can't shake away the uncomfortable feeling that the setting is straight out of a fantasy in spite of the employees' clothing and hospitality. Subaru, so, my grade totals to 70 points. This place is barely acceptable, but what is good, is how I would grade it. I hope you will work hard to improve in the future. Beatrice, what are you talking about, in fact? Subaru, it's a kind, cheap-spirited, and light-hearted kind of fun that relieves my frustration, so I'll be fine even if you let go of my hand. Beatrice, just to be sure, I'll hold it for a little while longer, I suppose. The grip on Subaru's left hand slightly strengthens, and he said no more, instead turning to face Emilia on his right. Emilia, who had been examining the strange surroundings, noticed his gaze. Emilia, it's so amazing, isn't it? It's only a little strange from the outside, but as soon as I enter it I feel so odd, sitting on the floor and taking off my shoes. Subaru, I didn't have a bed in my bedroom, I had a futon on the floor. I'd be surprised if this place doesn't have any. Would the employees let me have one? Otto, what an unusual and unnecessary proposition, or, rather, is Natsuki-san familiar with Kararaji-style customs? Otto, sitting opposite Beatrice, joins the conversation. The phrase Kararaji style caught Subaru's attention. Subaru, Kararaji style? Is this building a product of it? Otto, that's right, these Wafo architectural styles are designs taken from Kararaji, although their use isn't widespread here. In Kararaji itself, designs similar to the water plumage pavilions are considered traditional. Subaru, so why is this hotel in that style? Is it a diplomacy thing? This building was doubtlessly of Japanese design. Subaru wanted to confirm his suspicions on why that was. As if to supplement Subaru's thoughts, Otto raised a finger and spoke. Otto, that would be because of Pristella's history itself. Hashin of the Wastes was responsible for its construction. I trust you've heard of him. Subaru, really, I've heard a bit about this Hashin of the Wastes. Otto, despite being born in such a dark age, he managed so many achievements. Even calling him a sage wouldn't be a stretch. However, it was due to how dazzling he was that disputes ended up happening. Otto's story took place just over 100 years ago, when Pristella was split between Lugunican and Kararajan cultures. Pristella was geographically Lugnican, but its founder Hashin considered himself, and was considered Kararajan. Lugunica disliked the cultural influence of Kararaji, and tried to eradicate all traces of its culture, but the locals took offense and protested, which led to several territorial disputes between Lugunica and Kararaji. Eventually, diplomatic relations deteriorated to the point where both countries were on the verge of cutting off their relationship. Otto, fortunately, this didn't last. Gradually, regulations became more relaxed, and Lagunica and Kararaji mended their relations. During that period, the import of the customs of Kararaji slowed. It was probably due to that Laguncia felt secure in letting its security measures become more lax. Subaru, in any case, it's good the problem was solved. So Kararaji customs can be traced back to Hashin? Otto, it seems so. Hashin was a person with innovative ideas from the start. His influences on ideology, technology, and legislation were immense. Subaru, I see. Subaru had received his answer. Otto's story confirmed that Kararaji's founder, Hashin of the Wastes, had the same identity as Subaru and Al, a person summoned from a different world. Subaru now knew of 3 people who had been summoned at various times, Hashin from 400 years ago, Al from 20 years ago, and himself from 1 year ago. Subaru didn't understand the time gap, or why he was chosen, and it was meaningless for him to speculate wildly. But he certainly wasn't alone. Just knowing that granted Subaru's heart some small salvation. Anastasia, it would appear that everyone's enjoying the inn. A thin sliding door made of wood slid open quietly, and Anastasia, entering with perfect timing, stood at the other side with a smile. And, standing next to her. Long time no see, Emilia-sama. I sincerely apologize for being late. I should have been the first to welcome you. A man with an apologetic face and a sweet, soft-spoken voice. Just from hearing it, many women would assume it to be the voice of an angel. An amusing pipe dream, but the voice did have the necessary color, beauty, and strength. This was the voice of the Knight of Knights, Julius Juculius, which existed solely to vex. At least, that was how it felt to Subaru. Emilia, it's been a while, Julius. You look like you're doing well. Julius, I am grateful for your consideration. Likewise, Emilia-sama's kindness and beauty are ever the more polished. It's as if the shade of your gaze alone strengthens this kingdom, while the rest of the world suffers a loss. Subaru found his speech, as always, pretentious and disgusting. Julius turned his gaze to him. Julius, it's been a while since we've met face to face. You seem lively as always, Natsuki Subaru Dano. Subaru, stop with your phony attitude, it sends shivers down my spine. Subaru Dano my ass, you're so transparent. Julius, it's a well-known fact that you were recognized as Emilia-sama's knight. Your former disrespect of the position should now be disregarded by both of us. First and foremost, as a knight, are you trying to behave accordingly? Watching Julius's virtuous attitude, Subaru scowled. Subaru, yeah, I'm her knight now. No one thought I could do it, but here I am. Julius, I see. Although your position has changed, your attitude has not. In that case, I will make do without the courtesy. Julius dropped his formal attitude and gave a slight smile before approaching and looking down towards Subaru who was sitting on the floor. Julius, then, once again, long time no see, Natsuki Subaru. Do you work hard every day to be an honorable knight? Subaru, do you even need to ask? After all, I was beaten horribly by someone who thought I was dishonorable, or whatever. Julius, it seems my reputation is being attacked. I recall it being an honorable duel. Subaru, don't oversimplify, you bastard. However, the one at fault was Subaru, and even if he tried to say otherwise it would only make himself look worse. So Subaru, rather than futilely defend himself, insulted Julius in a light exchange of banter. Seeing this, Julius narrowed his eyes as if to say Julius, it seems that your shortcomings have been rectified somewhat. If you learn to see things with a knight's perspective, you would go far. Emilia-sama and Roswell-sama have an eye for potential, it seems. Even so. Julius? After appraising Subaru, Julius's looked around until his yellow eyes stopped on Beatrice, who met his gaze steadily with her own pale blue eyes. Beatrice, what is it? You shouldn't stare too hard at a lady, I suppose. Julius, that was terribly rude of me. I did not expect that a high-level spirit like you would be present here. Beatrice, because Betty is Subaru's partner, it is natural I appear here. I am on a completely different level than the quasi-spirits who you have brought in. I wonder if you are afraid of me, in fact. Beatrice stands with her hands on Subaru's shoulders and her chest puffed up. That grumpy attitude is based on Julius's attitude towards Subaru, who is inferior to Julius in every way except one. Both are spirit knights, but Subaru's contracted spirit is of a higher grade. Julius was accompanied by his 6 quasi-spirits corresponding to the 6 attributes. Greater spirits were stronger than quasi-spirits, who were stronger than lesser spirits. Taking that into consideration, it could be said that Subaru and Beatrice were the stronger team. However, Subaru, if you're comparing actual ability, we have so many faults, and are such a waste of potential that we can't even compare to his quasi-spirits. Beatrice, humph. If he does not stop disrespecting Subaru, I will tell you what will happen if you disdain Betty's partner, even if you are a handsome man who causes Betty's heart to waver, I suppose. Subaru, a handsome man who causes your heart to waver. That was hardly what Subaru wanted to hear, but it was Julius himself, the cause of the crack in their relationship, who caught the reason for it. Julius, do not misunderstand, your spirit is not going to betray you. Her instinct is merely being shaken by my divine protection. Subaru, your protection. Seriously, you also have one? What kind of protection? Julius, the protection I have is the blessing of gathering spirits. Simply speaking, it is a kind of blessing that garners the favor of spirits. I also have a contract with quasi-spirits of 6 attributes. Only with the power of that protection am I able to maintain them. Beatrice, Betty will not lose. Subaru is better than you. I suppose. Subaru, thank you. Please don't hurt me any further. Although the bond of trust between Subaru and Beatrice was unbreakable, he was still disappointed at his lack of a firm response. Whenever Subaru faced Julius, he would, without fail, become worked up over any of his own shortcomings. That was the main reason for his former hatred of Julius. Anastasia, as usual, our knight is attentive to Natsuki-kun. Julius, not at all. I am merely discussing the attitude of a knight as his senior. The knights of the kingdom of Lugunica may be judged from his behavior. Anastasia, well, Natsuki-kun already has a reputation as a knight, doesn't he? That Julius really is dishonest. In response to Anastasia's teasing, Julius lowers his head and nods silently. Anastasia probably would have won anyway, only to be smug about it later. Their motions had that air of familiarity. Beatrice patted Subaru's left shoulder, while Emilia his right. Beatrice, don't be too worried, in fact. Looks aren't everything, I suppose. Emilia, I'm glad that Subaru and Julius are getting along, I'd be happy if you two became good friends. How would other people view this? All Subaru could receive from them was unhelpful comfort. He scratched his cheek with frustration as Anastasia took a seat across from him. Subaru, come to think of it, why are only the two of you here? Mimi and Garfield are probably on a date, but... Anastasia, it's like you said, Mimi is with the blonde child right now. Hitaro adores his sister and is probably keeping an eye on them, and Taivi is probably keeping an eye on Hitaro. That's why they're not with me at the moment. Subaru, did Ricardo not come? I know that the kitten triplets are pretty strong, but isn't it comforting to have a full-grown knight around? It was odd that the triplets were here, but Ricardo, who usually handled their antics, was missing, as was Julius's brother Joshua. Julius, unfortunately, we're not just in Pristella for fun. Ricardo and my brother Joshua have business elsewhere. You should have met him by now, yes? Subaru, yeah, and he's a lot like you. If his frame were a little steadier, he could play you perfectly. Actually, he should do that anyway. You can leave now. Julius, I'll keep your interesting opinion in mind, but that would be difficult for Joshua. He's not a child well suited for excessive travel. Frustratingly, I hold several concerns about him, as his older brother. To Subaru's annoyance, Julius took him seriously and began worrying about Joshua. Otto interrupted Subaru's awkward silence by clearing his throat. Otto, I don't mind this casual atmosphere, but now that almost everyone's here, could we all give introductions? Anastasia, I'd like introductions too, since the only people here I really know are Emilia-san and Natsuki-kun. I especially want to hear more about this competent seeming officer, and the powerful Great Spirit Chan. Otto, oi, it's really not like you to be lacking information, Anastasia-sama. Is something amiss in your reports? Anastasia, I can imagine why you would have that impression, but I think it would be best if we don't get into whose information is accurate. Dodging a question by the competent seeming officer, she gives a nod to Julius. Julius, allow me to reintroduce myself. I am Julius Juculius of the Knights of the Kingdom of Lugunica, although presently, I am only serving as Anastasia-sama's knight. Julius gave Otto a slight bow, who nodded in response to his elegant gesture. Julius then moved on to an introduction of his master, Anastasia. Julius, I present the candidates for King of the Kingdom of Lugunica, Anastasia Hoshin, the gifted businesswoman who runs Kararaji's Hoshin Company. Otto, right, yes. Subaru, don't bow to just an introduction. Otto, HK. It was a mistake, the momentum was overwhelming. Subaru gave the back of Otto's head a whack, as Anastasia watched, pleased with Julius's introduction. Subaru, don't be intimidated by titles. Our Emilia-tan is a wonderful candidate for the same throne, and she won't lose to Anastasia. Emilia, that's right. I'm also a candidate, so I'll do my best. Subaru, aw, you're so cute. I can't help but say EMT. Emilia, I'm somewhat troubled that I find your antics calming. Seeing their typical, pointless, banter, Otto regains his composure and faces the opposing camp. Otto, thank you for your detailed introduction. I'm slightly late in saying this, but I'm Otto Suwon, Emilia-sama's Minister of Internal Affairs. Yes, thanks to a certain circumstances caused by a certain someone, a Minister of Internal Affairs is indeed what I am. Subaru, there seems to be bitterness about that decision. Otto, originally I was going to be a simple merchant, but now what has become of me? Although his voice echoed with lament, Subaru stood firm, refusing to give Otto the opportunity to escape. Anastasia stuck her tongue out, in a show of sympathy for Otto. Next, everyone turned to Beatrice. Seeing their gazes, she presented her small frame openly and squarely, then declared. Beatrice, Betty is the great spirit Beatrice, I suppose. I am Subaru's contract spirit, I suppose. As you can see, I rank highly both as a spirit and in cuteness, in fact. I would appreciate some delicious tea and a sweet snack, I suppose. Subaru maintained dignity until the end. It would always be in Beatrice's nature to be a mascot character. Subaru pulled her into his lap and began stroking her hair, while she glared, displeased. Subaru, well, that's why she's in a contract with me. Julius, I did believe you had a good compatibility with your spirit, and I wouldn't call this unexpected, but I didn't imagine a contract with a great spirit like Beatrice-sama would resemble this. Subaru, don't praise my Biko too much. She's just like her family, anything nice will just go to her head. Beatrice, humph. I'm declaring my displeasure with that hasty treatment, in fact. Beatrice gave him a look suggesting that she barely accepted him, and Subaru patted her cheek in response. Now that things had calmed down. Otto, well, introductions are over, and the atmosphere seems to have calmed down for time being. So, let's talk business, yes? As Emilia's Minister of Internal Affairs, it was Otto's role to take the lead in conversations like this and prevent them from being derailed. Anastasia answered while fiddling with her white fox fur scarf. Anastasia, well, it is our job as the hosts to entertain our guests. If you like. Otto, well then. First of all, what are your reasons for inviting us to Pristella? Anastasia, don't worry, you don't need to be so on guard. I'm not planning anything. A year has passed since the king's election started, and we haven't had opportunities to see each other recently, so I thought I'd just set one up. Most people would be easily misled by her gentle demeanor, but Otto was a veteran at negotiating. The conversation had turned into a battle between merchants. Otto, taking our situation into consideration, we're here because you lured us with bait. It's only natural that we would be cautious. Anna, well, we did invite you here for a reason. There are souvenirs in Pristella that you would want, aren't there? Think of this as a gift. Subaru, how did you know which gift we would want? Anna, it's sort of company secret, not Suki-kun. We'll just say that I'm an inquisitive gal and leave it at that. Anastasia covered her mouth while laughing. It would be a stretch to say she was making fun of Subaru's frustration, but that was how it felt. Aware of his angst, Beatrice could not help but sigh, while Subaru wondered how Anastasia learned of their circumstances. Emilia, it's not something I was hiding, so it was inevitable for that information to leak. Emilia's frank admission assuaged a part of Subaru's worries, and Anastasia blinked in Emilia's direction, who responded by tilting her head. Emilia, from this point onwards, I think that it would be better if everyone would appreciate what Anastasia's done, instead of being suspicious of her. Anastasia, to respond to your enemy in such a well-intentioned way. Besides, I'm not helping you purely for your benefit, Emilia-san. Emilia, but thanks to you, I have a way to find what I've been looking for. Thank you. I don't know how I can repay you, but I truly do thank you. Anastasia. Anastasia's eyes widened at Emilia's smiling response. To her surprise, Julius, seated next to her, softened his gaze, earning himself a glare. Anastasia, is something strange, Julius? Julius, no, it's merely that your surprised expression is so rare. I think that it is just as beautiful as your natural, unaffected face. Anastasia, trying to escape with flattery, well, I still appreciate those sweet words. With the help of Julius's words, Anastasia shook off her surprise and regained her usual tone. Then she fixed a sharpened gaze on a curious Emilia. Anastasia, Emilia-san, it's been a year, and you still have a disadvantage that you need to work around. Emilia, I'm lacking in many areas and causing everyone so much trouble, so I'm trying hard to catch up as soon as I. Anastasia, one correction, your greatest disadvantage isn't that. It's that you resemble the terrifying witch from the stories. Anastasia exhales deeply and smiles, causing Emilia to stiffen in shock at her sudden change in attitude. Disregarding her, Anastasia turned to Subaru and Otto. Anastasia, what about you two? Will you continue to support her? If you do, her reputation will affect your own. Subaru, I will, and I'll do my best to, because it's my policy to praise and support her no matter what. Otto, because of that, most of the burden lands on me. Funnily enough, I have no way out either. Subaru throwing a thumbs up, Otto glaring with a bitter gaze. Seeing their conflicting attitudes, Anastasia readjusted her scarf. Anastasia, well, it's fine. You surely understand the value of gratitude, after all. Otto, gratitude, huh? Gratitude is great. You don't have to keep it in the inventory, and there's no deadline attached to it. Anastasia, yep, isn't that right? And most importantly. Otto's words matched Anastasia's as the two each revealed the face of a merchant. Anastasia and Otto, you don't have to put a price tag on it. They spoke unanimously. Anastasia clapped her hands as Otto drooped his shoulders. It seemed that this was an established saying. Their perspectives on gratitude were chillingly identical. Anastasia, now, back to what Emilia-san needs, a colorless magical ore, one of the highest possible grade of purity. Emilia, yes, that's right, can you tell me what you know? On the way to Pristella, Emilia, having consciously realized that she had been acting out of selfishness, had felt guilty, and hadn't wanted to involve Subaru and Otto and the others. Nevertheless, with the opportunity right in front of her, she of course needed to act. She was closer than ever to seeing her precious family again. Anna, the best supplier of high-density ore is Muse Company. The person responsible for it currently resides in this town, Kiritaka Muse, a man whose heart was stolen by a songstress. Chapter 7, The Sinful Man Sets Sail. Subaru, his heart was stolen by a songstress, is that a nickname? It doesn't sound cool at all, but he's using it as if it is. Upon hearing Subaru's response, Anastasia laughs, before playing with the tips of her soft hair. Anastasia, you're right, it sounds more like a nickname than a title. But that's what he claims. My heart was stolen by a songstress. Subaru, what does that even mean? Anastasia, his heart was stolen by a woman, and he proudly and publicly announces it. Doesn't that remind you of what happened during the royal selection in the capital? Subaru, leave that dark, embarrassing history out of this. Subaru's face twists just thinking of the humiliation at Julius's hands. It made him want to grab his head and roll on the floor. Even though he still believed he was in the right, his way of expressing his thoughts left much to be desired. Anyway. Subaru, I see what you mean though. Although I regret to admit it, I can actually relate. Then, what's he like? Anastasia, the nickname is rather excessive, but the man himself is both responsible and flexible. Being named heir to Muse Company takes more than just being the eldest son. There's no need to doubt him as a businessman. Otto, I can also guarantee that, Natsuki-san, the young master of Muse Company, Kiritaka Muse, is famous indeed. His skill is astounding, even without Muse Company's already famous reputation for dealing with magical ore. As a merchant, Otto also knew of Kiritaka. However, after agreeing with her appraisal, he cast a sharp glare at Anastasia. Otto, indeed, Emilia-sama needs pure magical stones from a professional supplier, and we sent inquiry to Muse Company, but they weren't open to negotiation. It does make one wonder how and why Anastasia-sama is securing their aid. Anastasia, perhaps it is a matter of trust? Maybe it is a matter of sincerity. Whatever the case, one side must be willing to approach the other in order to establish a working relationship, don't you agree? Otto, I guess you could say that. Otto gave up on challenging the impassive Anastasia, who had been feigning a poor understanding of the situation. He moved on to discuss the magical stones themselves. Otto, first of all, do they actually have the rare magical stone we're looking for? Anastasia, I can understand your suspicions, but I'm sure you realize it would be obvious if we were simply lying about a prominent trader. Otto, I see. Then, are there any other conditions, or is it alright for us to negotiate with him? Anastasia, you're quite worried, but it's fine. Remember, I was simply aware of the location of the magical, or that Emilia-san's faction was looking for, and have already explained why I gave you that information. As Anastasia had said, gratitude required no price tag. Otto, understanding this, relented his questioning of Anastasia. Seeing their conversation draw to a close, Emilia raised a nervous hand. Emilia, is it okay if I ask something? Anastasia, please, go ahead. Anything involving our business and personal relationships are a matter of trust. Clearing doubts will give us peace of mind. Emilia, it seems this doesn't have much to do with money, does it? Anastasia, this is more than just a matter of hourly wages, after all. Well, that's to be expected. Don't you agree, Natsuki-kun? Anastasia smiled at Subaru, who gave an indifferent shrug in response. Emilia continued to ask her questions. Emilia, you've told us a little about Kiritaka-san, but I'm still curious about the songstress you mentioned. Is she someone famous? Although it was a simple question, Subaru also wanted an answer. As far as he knew, Kiritaka's surname, Muse, was something like a goddess of song in his world's mythology. It was an odd coincidence, but it could simply have been his fate to fall for a songstress. Subaru, I wonder if she's supposed to be some kind of mythical figure. Of course, she's not as influential as Hashin of the Wastes. Actually, if Hashin had fallen for someone mythical, it would have probably been a disaster. Julius, rest assured, the songstress Liliana-san is very real and currently remains in Pristella. Having been taken in by Kiritaka-san, that's what her position is like right now. Subaru, currently, is that different from her normal situation? Julius, I heard that she was originally a poetic bard who sang and traveled. Kiritaka-san saw one of her concerts, and the situation became what it is now. Listening to Julius' answer, Subaru pictured a bird caught in a birdcage. Birds were animals who could live freely until they caught the eye of a master who would entrap them. Was that what Liliana's situation was like? Did Kiritaka's paranoid affection keep Liliana trapped? Subaru, that's an unpleasant story. Her singing shouldn't be meant for just one person, she should do it freely. Julius, I do agree with that, but there may be a misunderstanding here. Although, given Kiritaka-san's obsession with Liliana, it may be an inevitable conclusion. Subaru, my opinion of this Kiritaka guy just lowered somewhat. Will the negotiation really be fine? It's hard to imagine communicating with someone like that. A greedy and disgusting rich man comes to mind, one who was gluttonous and lustful. As Otto had mentioned earlier, it was strange of him to turn a blind eye to Amelia's seemingly innocent search for magical ore. Subaru's impression of the man was poor indeed. Subaru, I'm not looking forward to showing my pretty Amelia-tan to such a person. Julius, him seeing Amelia-sama shouldn't be a problem. Kiritaka-san is a little difficult to handle, but he wouldn't be so indiscreet. However, Julius broke off, as if unsure how to continue, leaving Subaru puzzled at his rare hesitation. Finally, Julius sighed quietly and shifted his gaze from Amelia to Subaru. Julius, it might be best not to bring Beatrice-sama with you. Subaru, what's that supposed to mean? Anastasia, well, Kiritaka-san and I are on good terms, so I've spoken with him enough to imagine what he would think. Julius's and Anastasia's words. They lead to only one conclusion. Subaru stands up and... Subaru. He's a lolicon. Julius, it's something that people can only speculate on. In other words, it's an unconfirmed rumor. In any case, his tastes don't change how charming Anastasia-sama is. Anastasia, your words lack elegance. Elegant or not, Anastasia didn't seem to mind what Julius said. Subaru's theory wasn't refuted, and he accepted that it was true. Even so, he thought to himself, are you serious? Subaru, more annoying lolicons, as if Klein-san weren't enough trouble. Recalling the universally competent butler, Subaru wanted to bury his head in his hands. However, there was definitely a difference between Klein and Kiritaka's tastes. Klein would probably show no interest in Anastasia. What Klein sought was inner youth, and it was reflected by his attitude toward Amelia. He saw her inner immaturity and respected her as a lowly in spirit. On the other hand, Kiritaka was a person who places emphasis on external appearances. Anastasia was probably around the same age as Subaru, but she looked significantly younger. Since her body has little potential for further development, she could be considered a legal lowly. Kiritaka's inclination to like her was obvious. And Beatrice. Subaru, our Biko is a versatile lowly that can accommodate the tastes of both Klein and Kiritaka. Beatrice, I did not quite understand that, but I feel like it was a very rude comment, in fact. Subaru, idiot. Ugh. I'm worried about you. You have a dangerous appeal. You'll make me worry if you're not more aware. Beatrice, if you're that worried, then I suppose you're not doing anything wrong. He. Although she didn't share Subaru's panic, Beatrice happily grabbed onto the hem of Subaru's sleeve. For the time being, Subaru was going to hold onto her tightly. As long as they were in this city, it would be a good idea to keep an eye on her. Amelia, so, does he just like short people? Anastasia, such an innocent response. No, it's more like he's the type of person who likes eating fresh, immature fruits. Subaru, stop. Don't say such dirty things to my angel. I understand now. No more is needed. Yes? Stop. Subaru guarded Beatrice with his left hand and Amelia with his right. Anastasia laughed at Subaru's overprotectiveness while Julia showed a wry smile. Otto, setting aside Natsuki-san's attitude, we accept your conditions. If possible, I would like to meet Kiritaka-san. Would I find him in Pristella's Chamber of Commerce? Anastasia, that's right. Well, Kiritaka-san is pretty busy, seeing as he has to run many of the city's functions. I wonder which building you would find him in. Anastasia responded to Otto's serious question with light teasing, who could only helplessly accept her answer. Otto brings his hand to his chin, then turns to Subaru. Otto, as expected, even the first step will be difficult. I would like to set up a safe place to calmly talk things through beforehand, but where should we go? Subaru, that's right, well, to be honest, I have no idea where anything is. So I was planning to just wander around. From the main gate, Pristella didn't appear too large, but as an outsider, navigating the unfamiliar townscape would be a nightmare. Subaru is confident in his sense of direction, but how useful was that confidence in a town where travel was conducted by waterway? Otto, perhaps, there are people giving tours along the waterway after all, many tourists come here, and there are probably people who are giving tours to capitalize on that. Subaru, that wouldn't work, I'd definitely get seasick. Once in elementary school, I got so seasick crossing a lake on a field trip that people made fun of me for being drunk. Beatrice, I don't quite understand what that means, but you look like you have bad memories of it, in fact. Looking at a reminiscing Subaru, Beatrice voiced her pity. In any case, Otto's suggestion was probably the best, so Subaru would have to accept it. When? Julius, forgive me for interrupting your discussion, but that worry is needless. Emilia, what do you mean, Julius? Emilia turned to look at Julius, who smiled faintly. Julius, it's simple. We've already sent messengers to correspond with Karitaka-san. Emilia, messengers? Julius, my younger brother Joshua, of course. Ricardo is accompanying him. Subaru was glad to finally know where those two were, but he was also somewhat annoyed. Although they were addressing a natural obligation. Subaru, it would have been nice if we were here to welcome us. Julius, since we invited you, it's our duty to handle these arrangements. You don't need to be worried about the finer subtleties. They're not worth mentioning. Subaru, don't bring them up then. Their banter was the same as always. On one hand, Subaru's respect for Julius's faction grew, but on the other, he was deeply troubled by his own faction's lack of preparation. Anyway. Anastasia, in that case, you're probably all anxious, but we should probably wait for the two of them to come back. Speaking of which, my personal bodyguard hasn't returned. Subaru, oh, right. Subaru assumes a more relaxed posture and sits down. He prepares himself to answer questions about the absent Garfield. Anastasia immediately follows that lead. Anastasia, as you can see, Mimi is absent. What's she doing? That child accompanying her, the one named Garfield. Tell me about him. Subaru, his name is Garfield Tinsel. He's 15 years old, the age where kids dream too much. He's in the habit of biting things and snoring loudly. But, other than that, he's an honest, straightforward kid. Even if his feelings are battered, his naive way of looking at things won't change. He's that kind of pure youth. Anastasia, that's likely true. I don't want my cute little sister stolen from me, seemed to be what Anastasia is desperately, but sweetly, thinking. Even without considering his potential relationship with Mimi, Subaru thought of Garfield as a cute little brother, and believed in making his value known. Emilia, I wonder what Songstress-san's famous voice sounds like. I feel so anxious. I wonder if she'd perform for me if I gave her a request. Julius, don't worry, Liliana is someone well-versed in social customs. So if she's present at your meeting with Karitaka-san, I'm sure she'd be eager to perform. Emilia, wah, that's right. It sounds fun. Meanwhile, Julius's words seemed to further Emilia's interest in the Songstress. Otto, seeing the dialogue between the two groups, sighed. Otto, since we're in opposing factions, I thought relationships would be more tense. Did I overthink things? Beatrice, you don't need to be discouraged, in fact. You're not thinking too much. Subaru and Emilia aren't thinking enough, I suppose. Beatrice's rare show of sympathy confirmed Otto's suspicions that he will be mentally and physically overtaxed during his stay in Pristella. Joshua had returned, while Garfield was soon to arrive as well. Joshua, Karitaka-san is usually busy, but rather than being at the city hall today, he'll be at his office in the Muse Company headquarters, so this is an ideal time to visit him. Anastasia, that's that then. You did well, Joshua. Joshua, upon returning to his older brother and his lady, makes his report. After Anastasia nodded, satisfied, Joshua turned his gaze to Subaru. Joshua, thank you for coming such a long way. I'm sure you've heard the story from Anastasia-sama by now, but we've established contact with Karitaka-san. Subaru, oh, thanks a lot. That saves us loads of time. Joshua, I do not enjoy helping you, I'm just following Anastasia-sama's orders. I really wanted to avoid having my brother meet you. Subaru, you're honest, as usual. Julius's eyes widened at Joshua's frank speech. He was apparently unaware of the animosity Joshua held toward Subaru. Julius, Joshua. Everyone present, including him, are here under Anastasia-sama's invitation. Being rude to our guests will hurt Anastasia-sama's reputation, so please refrain from doing so. Joshua, my sincere apologies, brother. Uses, sama honorific. Julius sighs at Joshua, whose gaze had turned sulky. He then turned to Subaru and said apologetically. Julius, apologies. From both of us. Usually, my brother does not engage in this kind of behavior. It seems that it's being caused by the unfamiliar environment. Subaru, I don't mind if you guys do it separately, but being picked on by both brothers together in this environment is kind of scary for me too. Julius, heh. We'll keep that in mind. Julius responded to Subaru's words with a mixture of humor and irony. Joshua looked unsatisfied, but when Subaru caught his eye he turned away. Was the reason intense jealousy? Emilia, well, thanks to your favor we can go visit Kiritaka-san now. Can we consider the inn a place to stay afterward? Anastasia, feel free to do so. The Water Plumage Pavilion is a lodging with a great track record, both in atmosphere and comfort. Please look forward to dinner. Emilia, that's true. In that case, we'll look forward to it. Emilia smiled at the confident Anastasia, running a hand through her long silver hair. Emilia, we'll be sure to speak properly with Kiritaka-san first, so that we can enjoy a delicious dinner without any worries. As Emilia finished talking, she stood up to leave the inn. Subaru followed behind her as they made their way toward the ship that Joshua had secured for them when... Oi, Captain. Wait there. I'm tellin' ya. Garfield hurriedly leapt in front of the inn to intercept them. His shining blonde hair and clothes were slightly dirted, and his expression was tired. Garfield, found ya. Not fair dog-faced guy, don't think I'd have survived. Subaru, by dog-faced guy, do you mean Ricardo? Were you on a sweet date with Mimi before her big, scary uncle interrupted? Garfield, a date? It's no joke. Soon's that midget dragged me away, another midget same's her attacked me and nearly killed me. If I fought back, they'd probably start crying, so instead I just spent T-Day running away. From Garfield's story, Subaru surmised that it had been Ricardo who had prevented that tragedy. Mimi, of course, had two twin brothers who could have caused it. Perhaps it was Tybee, whose calm disposition could have been hiding a sharper side. Or perhaps Itaro, fearing that his sister would be taken away, had displayed his siscon tendencies for the first time. Whoever it had been, the situation seemed fine now. Garfield, so, since I didn't want be excluded your plans, I rushed over here, Captain. Subaru, my bad. We were planning on meeting the guy who's selling the magical ore. Thinking on it, I guess we should have waited for our bodyguard. Garfield, is obvious, yeah? Subaru added the relieved Garfield to his party and made way for the docks. The boat that Subaru's group was going to ride on had already been prepared. All of the boats were fairly small with only enough room for 8 people, including the boat's sailor. Sailor, there's a city law about boat size. If the boats are too large, the waterways get clogged, and it's unsafe if boats get too close together. The dark-skinned sailor steering their boat was happy to answer Subaru's questions. Dragon carriages on wide highways weren't much of a problem, but on waterways, traffic rules needed to be set. Sailor, if a collision happens and a ship sinks, that's usually regarded as the fault of the sailor's lack of technique. Besides, a lot of these ships have been passed down from generation to generation, so losing one would mean losing your reputation as well. Subaru, of course. Regarding the ship's water dragons, are there any conflicts between them? Sailor, the water dragons live here and, in a way, they manage to be polite with one another. Like land dragons, they have good instincts and can be trusted to handle a smaller boat. You should try one out if you have the chance. Subaru remembered the way he felt the first time he saw a land dragon and was excited by the sailor's recommendation. Maybe his first ride with a water dragon would evoke the same sense of wonder. Emilia, this is my first time crossing water with a ship. I'm so excited. Subaru, is that so? Well, this does feel different than the sea. Emilia, what is the sea? Subaru, imagine an endless pool of water. My hometown was right next to it. Emilia, but that would be nice when you felt thirsty. Subaru laughs in response to Emilia's childlike answer. Unfortunately, drinking seawater when you're thirsty would lead to death. Regardless, he couldn't mention that seawater is saltwater without it raising more questions. Otto, where there's a river there's usually a bridge, but if you need to smuggle without crossing a bridge, your only other option is going by boat. Subaru, sure sounds like you're talking from experience. Otto, it's not like I've ever done anything like that. It's just second-hand knowledge. Stop casting such strange suspicions on me, really. Garfield, Otto and you're really sweating over there. As if ignoring Otto's suspiciously specific denial, the boat followed the sailor's movements as it turned to join the main waterway ahead. Incredibly, the current was flowing against the direction of the boats. Subaru, what? How is the water flowing like this? Amelia, he. I actually know the answer to that. Look, see the city walls. She lightly patted Subaru's shoulder and pointed into the distance with her free hand. Subaru cast his gaze in that direction and saw the great stone towers stationed on the city's walls. There were 4 of these towers, oriented north, south, east, and west of the city. Amelia, those towers control the flow of water in the town. It uses a sophisticated magical mechanism that operates with the power of a magical water stone. It seems that the big floodgates in the city are also controlled by it. Subaru, wow, that is incredible. This is even cooler than the travel laws. Thanks to Amelia's explanation, Subaru more or less understood the mysterious mechanism behind the flowing water. Sure enough, the Watergate City Pristella was very different from the others, and Subaru still had much he needed to learn about it, including the city's laws. Subaru, the laws here are closely related to the operation of the city, right? Amelia, is this about Kiritaka-san? Like I said. I wonder what kind of a person he is. It would be great if he gave us the magical or upon hearing our story. Touching the pendant hanging on her chest, Amelia murmured her hopes uncertainly. While listening to her murmurs, Subaru placed his hands on his chin and closed his eyes. Then, he swayed his head along with the movement of the boat and whispered. Subaru. Beatrice, I didn't catch what you said just now, I suppose. Beatrice was probably the only one who could hear him. Upon hearing her loud voice, everyone turned to stare at him. Feeling their gazes fixed on him, Subaru smiled and said. Subaru, crap, I'm gonna puke. In that moment, a fuss was created. Chapter 8, Traveling with Seasickness. Beatrice, you should be better now, I suppose. Subaru, no, wait a little more. Wow, this is terrible, the world is still shaking. I'm still shaking. Even death can't cure this sickness. On a street facing a large aqueduct, Subaru and Beatrice sat side by side, their feet dangling over the side of the waterway. Together, they admired the flow of the clear water. Passersby smiled faintly upon seeing them. Perhaps they assumed they were siblings, or perhaps they thought they were tourists who had never seen such structures. Subaru, neither of those assumptions are entirely wrong, but it's sad that they don't really know what our relationship is. You. Beatrice, you should focus on recovering rather than pointlessly worrying. In fact, I wonder why you think Betty is here, I suppose. Subaru, were you worried that I'd be lonely? Biko is so kind. Beatrice, that's irrelevant, in fact. Just hurry up and get better, I suppose. In order to accommodate the weight of Subaru leaning against her, Beatrice strained her small frame. Seeing this, Subaru's love for her increased exponentially. Could it ever stop growing? About 15 minutes ago, Subaru had been forced to continue his journey on foot after the fuss he had created with his seasickness. Amelia, Otto, Garfield remained on the boat to head for the negotiations with the Muse Company and Kiritaka. Originally, Amelia had also wanted to accompany Subaru on foot, but Otto had said, the longer we keep the other party waiting, the worse our impression will be. Heeding his advice, she left Subaru behind. It was most likely the right decision. Subaru, well, even if Anastasia had told us to be careful, in broad daylight, most people probably aren't going to try anything. Certainly, there was anxiety in being left alone in an unfamiliar city after being invited there by a political opponent, but there was an escort named Garfield to deal with that. However, the currently alone Subaru was important enough to Amelia Camp that an attack on him wasn't completely inconceivable. Even so, if Anastasia had malicious intent, she was too savvy to orchestrate an attack on him in the middle of the day. In addition, Subaru trusted that Julius wouldn't condone any type of ambush. Subaru, as he had said, a knight must remain chivalrous at all times. Beatrice, Subaru. It's rather annoying when you laugh to yourself, I suppose. Subaru, wait, I totally wasn't laughing. Well, I'd never think of that guy and laugh. Anyway, let's go. Subaru stood up and took a deep breath, rubbing his arms and neck lightly. Although they still felt a little heavy, the seasickness was mostly gone. He could more or less move around normally again. Beatrice, well, Betty will help if needed, I suppose. Subaru, oh, I'm counting on you. Even so, I doubt anything will happen. Only an idiot would attack us in broad daylight with so many people around. All of the king candidates needed to keep an eye on their reputation. In public, they needed to appear both pleasant and authentic. Amelia, who was a naturally honest and kind girl, did not need to worry herself about pretenses. Subaru, in other words, Amelia's real advantage over the other candidates is her angelic innocence. Beatrice, your thoughts are going in an unpleasant direction, in fact. Subaru, look, let's go that way, I suppose. Follow me. In the past year, Beatrice had become entirely accustomed to putting up with the easily distracted Subaru. She had been navigating through the unfamiliar cityscape with ease while leading him by hand. Muse Company's headquarters was apparently located at the boundary between the 1st and 2nd districts. Subaru, having been seasick, had only dimly registered the directions, but Beatrice had memorized them all. If they had one problem, it would be the complexity of Pristella's pathways. Although they had arrived by following the main canal, they had to take detours around the several small waterways feeding into the main one. Sometimes there were bridges, but on several occasions Subaru needed to jump over a narrow waterway while carrying Beatrice. Beatrice, Subaru, that is a splendid fountain, I suppose. Subaru, you're right. Biko, how did we get to the park? The fountain which had caught Beatrice's attention stood in the center of a park. It was surrounded by well-maintained flowerbeds and children playing games. This was indeed a peaceful and relaxing sight. The only issue was, Subaru, is this where we're supposed to be going? This is the last place I'd picture finding the heir of a large company. If businessmen made deals here, then all of their money would get wet. Beatrice, I wonder if seasickness makes you cynical, I suppose. That's the first thing you think of upon seeing this beautiful scenery. Betty feels sorry for you, in fact. Subaru, the old you would have blushed and tried to hide this mistake, but now you're becoming rather fresh, you're breaking your father's heart. Beatrice, why you re 400 years too early to be calling yourself Betty's father? Subaru lacks consciousness in discussing such matters, in fact. Subaru was unsure why Beatrice had overreacted to the latter half of his sentence, but didn't pursue the issue. Their problem right now was figuring out how they arrived at the park. Subaru, Biko. Since you were leading me so confidently, I thought you knew the way? Beatrice, I know the destination, in fact. However, the roads were complicated, I suppose. In order to avoid getting lost, I used the left-hand method that I'd read about before. It didn't work, I suppose. Subaru, the left-hand method? Beatrice, holding out your left hand and following the wall, in fact. Subaru, isn't that for mazes? Beatrice's method was the well-known tactic in conquering a maze. Subaru recognized its effectiveness, but there were a number of drawbacks too. Namely, Subaru, if you start using the left-hand method in the middle of a maze, you might end up touching the inside wall and never be able to leave. Furthermore, we're not in a maze, we're in a city. Beatrice, humph. It's just like Subaru to disregard tried and tested wisdom, I suppose. Betty was a librarian managing a forbidden archive. She pities any fool who disregards the wisdom of history, in fact. Subaru, I'm not a fool, you're a fool for assuming you understand everything. She was old enough to be self-righteous, 400 years, but it took her long enough to enter the outside world, 400 years, that there was a big enough gap, 400 years, between her logic and common sense. And so, she was a surprisingly unreliable loli. Beatrice, I wonder if Subaru has a better idea, in fact. Let's see you try, I suppose. She put her hands on her waist, fixating on Subaru with a disagreeable glare. On the other hand, Subaru had just suffered the embarrassment of letting Beatrice see his seasickness and wanted to make up for it by appearing reliable. Subaru, ha. You correctly decided that this place is like a labyrinth, but you were wrong to think that it was a perfect maze and to use the left-hand rule. I have some less flawless tactics. Beatrice, ho, you're pretty confident, I suppose. Go ahead and tell me your plan, in fact. Subaru, I'll tell you. Its name is the caged method. Beatrice? Beatrice tilted her head, a question mark floating above it. The name didn't convey the actual content of his plan, so Subaru cleared his throat and started to explain thoroughly. Subaru, okay. First of all, we'll call our current position the starting point. If we proceed, we'll eventually come to a fork. We'll continue until we hit a dead end. Then, we'll go back to our first fork. Beatrice, continue, I suppose. Subaru, then, we'll map that branch and choose another one. Using the same method as the first branch, we'll walk until we hit a dead end. Eventually, we'll have every branch and every path of the dungeon mapped out. Beatrice, that would take far too long, in fact. I wonder if we would even arrive before nightfall, I suppose. Subaru, I idiot. What's wrong with taking the certain path? How many people do you think safely survived a dungeon with this method? I'm doing just as you said, relying on the wisdom of history. Beatrice, losing sight of your goal by relying on wisdom is a bad habit, in fact. Certainly, it hurt that Beatrice trampled on his idea, but even Subaru had to admit his plan had too many faults. It was a time-consuming tactic, and besides, they had no pen or paper with which to draw a map. Subaru, then there's only one other method. Beatrice, what is it, in fact? Betty's trust in you is significantly lower now, I suppose. Although this method was reliable, it wasn't going to improve Subaru's image. Acting in good faith doesn't make you reliable. Subaru, okay, we'll have to work together here. Beatrice, on what? Subaru, let's humbly ask for directions. Beatrice, that's fine, in fact. Subaru had accepted that he couldn't solve the problem on his own. He thought Beatrice's pride would be the only problem, but she seemed okay with it as well. Fortunately, Kiritaka Muse was both a famous merchant and heavily involved in urban planning. Everyone would know where his office was. With that in mind, Subaru looked around, hoping to find someone to ask. But Subaru, even though this is a park, there's nobody here. Beatrice, the timing is bad, in fact. It's late afternoon, the perfect time for naps, I suppose. Subaru definitely agreed with Beatrice, and the temptation to nap in the shade rose. He decided to head back to the direction of the main canal, where there were more people when. Subaru, do you hear something? The faint sound of wind and water. No, it was the sound of a singing human voice. Subaru could hear it only intermittently, but he was drawn toward it, looking for the source. Beside him, Beatrice also seemed to be moving toward the sound. Upon arriving at the scene, they stood, overwhelmed, forgetting to even breathe. A lone girl stood in front of a monument at the back of the park, her voice raised in song. She was a small girl with dark skin, large round eyes, and a vibrant face. Her crisp yellow twintails were decorated with small, strange ornaments. In her hands, she held an instrument between the size of a guitar and an ukulele. She played and sang simultaneously. The energy contained in the song could only be described as overwhelming. Subaru, listening to her sing, felt a non-existent squall by his face, and a non-existent earthquake under his feet. The clarity, the volume, of her song was overwhelming. Her voice, singing a balladic tune, was the only sound in existence. That lone girl, using only her voice and fingertips, created an energy comparable to that of an orchestra. Subaru was far from the only one who had been utterly captivated by her. There was an audience of around 20 people, all holding their breaths, completely unaware of Subaru. Likewise, Subaru had only noticed the singing girl, whose presence entirely dominated the space. As Subaru's entire body trembled, the girl's song came to its climax, and the audience's enthusiasm came to its peak. Girl, without money, without a future, without hope, with only vanity. What can I see but the darkness? And beyond the darkness, nothing. The end is approach. Subaru, how is this song so exciting even after calming down, oi? Girl, ha. The song which even dreams couldn't create was unexpectedly interrupted by Subaru. As soon as he had surprised her, the girl had stopped singing and dropped her instruments. Of course, the music had also stopped. Immediately, the intense atmosphere surrounding the girl vanished. Subaru realized that he had messed up. Subaru, oh no, I didn't read the mood. Sorry, I didn't mean that hurts. HK. Ow. Beatrice, Subaru you idiot, it's ruined, in fact. What a waste of a rare and lovely mood, in fact. You just had to thoughtlessly ruin it, I suppose. You've gone too far, in fact. Before he could apologize, a sharp pain pierced his toes. Looking down, he saw an indignant Beatrice stomping on his foot with her heel. Beatrice seemed to return to reality when the song was interrupted, and considered that interruption unforgivable. Then. Oh, what was that song? This is a park, just a while ago, I was in the darkness. No, I couldn't help it at the time, but. The audience who had been swallowed by the song slowly tumbled back into the reality. Everyone turned to the criminal who had ruined the song. That was not Suki Subaru, a man who had a reputation for failing to read the mood. Don't do thoughtless things. Everyone loudly and angrily cursed Subaru. Beatrice, thank you everyone, I suppose. Actually, I enjoyed it. Subaru, don't sound so happy. Take a look at my feet, are they still the same size? Are my feet okay? Beatrice, I wouldn't care, in fact. For now, don't consider Betty your companion, I suppose. Beatrice turned her face away and stubbornly denied Subaru, so he checked on his own. His right foot had almost doubled in size. Subaru had poured water on the concert, so their reaction wasn't entirely unexpected. One by one, the audience had thanked the girl who sang and shook hands with her, and about half of them had stepped on Subaru's foot before leaving. Subaru had been unable to say anything, and Beatrice had tolerated it, leaving Subaru a public enemy. Subaru prepared himself for both external and internal bleeding in his feet. Subaru, don't you think you should let me rely on your healing magic? Beatrice, it would be a waste of my slowly accumulating mana, in fact. Wait for it to heal naturally, or ask Amelia, I suppose. Subaru, you and Amelia V been taking care of me for a long time, huh? Since he'd come to this world, he'd sustained a steadily increasing amount of injuries, but they rarely lasted. Even injuries from his daily parkour, such as bruises, abrasions, and sprains, would be promptly healed by Amelia or Beatrice. His fear of pain hadn't diminished, but there was a relief in knowing that his injuries all had a cure. Subaru, well, I'll just treat the pain as a lesson this time. That said, Subaru caressed Beatrice's head, who was still turned away. Beatrice gave him her gentle hands. Beatrice, well, I suppose it's fine, in fact. As long as you reflect on it and learn your lesson, I suppose. Subaru, yep, I'll do just that. Sorry, I was wrong. Subaru and Beatrice finished their talk and turned to the girl. Because he'd been troublesome for her, Subaru would try to apologize. The girl, who had been watching the entire time, said, "Girl, an inspiration." Subaru? Girl, listen. I don't know the difference between our years. Leaving a staggering Subaru behind, the girl strings her the instrument and instantly finds a rhythm. She timed herself, breathed in a small breath, and started to sing. Girl, my love, do you see it, do you feel it? The difference between our ages. Even though our surroundings may change, I wouldn't care one bit. All I care about is our height difference. Wait, my love. Please wait a moment. A little bit, just a little bit more. If I stand on the tips of my toes, I can reach you. If the two of us stay so close together, the difference in our ages is irrelevant. So please, only 2 years, please wait that long. The distance between our love is sweetly melting away. Subaru, as the distance in our love shrinks, it turns into a quiet, burning love. Eventually 2 cranes will deliver to us 2 children, and our future will be a bright love story. Beatrice, yeah. At the end of the girl's song, Subaru suddenly joined in with a rap. Beatrice raised her voice with astonishment, demanding an explanation. Beatrice, wait a minute. Why is Subaru suddenly part of the song, I suppose? Why did you just accept his addition, in fact? Subaru, oh I, what are you talking about, Biko? Does the song cross a line? Liliana, well said. Liliana's heart is trembling with excitement. Beatrice, why your attitude that Betty is the wrong is unacceptable, I suppose. Subaru, feeling bad for Beatrice who had no one on her side, turned to the dark-skinned girl. Subaru, let me mention that Biko and I aren't in the kind of relationship that you're thinking of. Even if she grew 2 more years, she still wouldn't be in my target range. Liliana. She'll only be 13 or 14 by then. Despite how I look, I'm good at guessing ages. Well, I guess this is a skill gained from life experience. Subaru, she'll be roughly 402 years old. Liliana, oh please. There's no need to be this stubborn just because I hit the mark. She dismissed Subaru's words as an excuse and ignored them. Subaru also thought that correcting her would lead to too much trouble. Anyway, the topic had changed too much. Subaru, back to the original topic, was the inspiration you mentioned earlier the song? Liliana, yeah, that's right. Despite how I may look, I'm easily moved. Once I saw your interactions, I felt like I needed to immortalize them in song. Be proud. The girl, speaking quickly and fluently, raised her hands or her mouth. Liliana, but what I did wasn't enough. Big Brother helped by adding the bit at the end. That was the first time I'd gotten such a reaction. I was very happy. Subaru, that was because the god of rap blessed me. I certainly couldn't do it again. I don't have the skill or experience. Liliana, one single, shining moment. Seeing the mutual understanding without words between the two drained the patience of the little girl who had been left out. Beatrice, Subaru. Subaru, what is it? Biko. Beatrice yanked his sleeve down and shockwaves sent Subaru flying. The momentum wouldn't kill him, but he still bounced all over the lawn of the park. Meanwhile, Beatrice turned to the dark-skinned girl. Beatrice, it's no good for you to take inspiration from us anymore, in fact. Betty is putting an end to it, I suppose. If you resist you'll end up like him, in fact. Liliana, do. Beatrice, be quiet, I suppose. Only think about promptly responding to Betty, in fact. The reason nothing is happening to you right now is because your song was lovely, I suppose. But who knows how long this mercy will last, in fact. Even seeing her trembling, Beatrice's voice held no mercy. Seeing her hurried nod, Beatrice sighed. The girl was too scared to form words. Then. Beatrice, Muse Company, take Betty to where Kiritaka Muse is, I suppose. Liliana. Beatrice, I'll not say it again, in fact. Lead the way or be subjected to Betty's anger, I suppose. Liliana, I'll lead you there. I will. When pressed with the choice, the girl instantly raised her white flag. Beatrice nodded, satisfied, as Subaru walked back toward them. Beatrice, tell me if you have any complaints in fact. Subaru, is it acceptable to use your mana like this for educational purposes? Beatrice, it depends on the time and place, I suppose. Subaru, what a kind consideration, Biko. Was it okay to threaten someone to guide us? Subaru scratched his face and looked down. Beatrice looked at him with a sullen gaze. Subaru continued. Subaru, that child is probably the famous songstress who knows Kiritaka. Maybe we shouldn't make a bad impression on her. She'd mentioned that her name was Liliana earlier, and there was no mistaking that singing ability, even if her personality wasn't what he had imagined. Liliana, I'll do anything you want me to. Yeah, whether it be guiding you or licking your shoes, all I humbly ask is that you spare my life. There was a girl on the ground desperately begging for her life. Correction, that girl was the songstress Liliana. Although, looking at her, no trace of the graceful songstress could be seen. Chapter 9, The Value of a Songstress. Liliana, then, let me introduce myself once again. Although I'm no longer a traveling minstrel, I'm still a free-spirited bard who goes wherever the wind blows me. My name is Liliana, please continue to advise me in the future HK. Beatrice, you bit yourself, in fact. One hand holding her instrument gracefully, Liliana smiled as blood flowed freely from her mouth. Beatrice gently wiped it away for her. It seemed her tongue had been wounded rather seriously. Beatrice, it's rude to bite your tongue like that. Subaru, have you heard of are you the famous songstress? I know you introduced yourself with her name, but it's probably kinda rare to just meet her on the street. Liliana, I'm not fond of that title since I'm only a fledgling musician. It sounds so sophisticated. I'm so far from reaching my peak that if people thought I called myself the songstress they'd say I'm too conceited. Wiping at the bloodied lower half of her face, Liliana's expression seemed almost coy, leading Subaru to hesitate over his interrogation of her. He decided that rather than interrogate, he'd try to casually converse with her. Even so, considering the words she'd just said, she seemed to have a very high sense of professionalism. Subaru, although I can see where you're coming from, I think you can accept some praise. That being said, I also sort of admire your attitude about it. Liliana, no, it's nothing so grand. Focusing on getting through each day is fine. So please. Subaru? Liliana stretched out a hand to a confused Subaru. Since it was empty, Subaru had no idea what she wanted and tilted his head at her smiling face. Liliana, now that you've heard the voice of the songstress, please give me something in return. Did you think listening was free? If so, then your attitude troubles me. Subaru, then give me back the emotions you made me feel. And take back your song. Liliana, what are you saying? How do you think a bard makes a living? Are you saying I should be giving out feelings for free? I don't think so. Liliana stomped angrily on the ground. What she said wasn't wrong, but Subaru's impression of the songstress had been significantly lowered. Judging from how cold Beatrice's large eyes were, he assumed she felt something similar. Subaru, alright. Let's discuss a tip. How much do you want? Liliana, no, the tip should be for the customer to decide based on what his heart feels. Although the more the better. Subaru, for crying out loud. Taking advantage of Liliana's laughing, which showed her blood-stained teeth, Subaru pinched her chin with his cold hands. Her face was small so it was incredibly easy to pinch, and Liliana had to run several laps around Subaru before he let her go. Stepping away dizzily, she muttered it was just a joke over and over to herself. Liliana, if you're looking for the Chamber of Commerce, aren't you Kiritaka-san's guests? I wonder if you should be acting this way. Subaru, I don't know you very well, but my impression is only getting worse. I think it's about time we got going. The more he talked to Liliana, the closer Subaru came to reaching the limits of his patience. When they'd found out they were lost, they were very close to being late, and if they delayed any longer they would very likely miss a critical negotiation. After negotiations there would be more challenges and Subaru didn't want to lose face by missing the critical first step. Shaking her head, and her hair with it, Liliana ceremoniously announced I understand and began to lead the way. Liliana, so why does the honored guest want to see Kiritaka-san? Beatrice, you don't understand your position here, I suppose. Stop nosing into matters that you are unrelated to and quietly take us to our destination, in fact. Liliana, eep. Faced with Beatrice's intimidating tone, Liliana gave a cry resembling that of a small bird's. Subaru pulled on one of Beatrice's spiral twintails. Subaru, you don't have to be so fierce. Then again, we can't reveal everything, so a simple, clear explanation would be difficult to make. Liliana, but I'm Kiritaka-san's confidant. Isn't it just a matter of time before I find out? Subaru, well, if it's really only a matter of time, then there should be no harm in me taking precautions. Liliana, if you say so, You're not a person with very good character, huh? Subaru, you're pretty straightforward, aren't you? If you didn't have talent for singing, then you'd be in serious trouble. There's a saying that geniuses were often strange people, and Liliana was probably an example. Singing came easily to her, but her social graces were lacking. Liliana, but really, I am a little worried. I've been out for a long time, so I'll probably be scolded when I get back. Subaru, when we're discussing negotiations, please take care not to speak up. All right? Liliana, I got it. Subaru, huh, really? That was unexpected. Seeing Beatrice and Subaru's satisfied expressions, for some reason, Liliana puffed out her cheeks in a pout. She raised the instrument in her hands and began to play. Liliana, inspiration just hit me. Big waves, large waves, waves of the world. Subaru, no thanks, we're good. Before the solo could start, Subaru hurriedly snatched Liliana's instrument out of her hands. Liliana made an ah sound and she stretched to reach it, but her tiny body couldn't reach Subaru's hands. Subaru, it's not a human hostage, it's a musical instrument. If you lead us to the Chamber of Commerce, I'll give it back to you. Liliana, you're terrible. Evil. Barbaric. Depraved. Subaru, ha ha ha, is that so? Having just been denounced as the world's most wicked person, Subaru plucked a string on the instrument. The sound it made was similar to that of an acoustic guitar. Subaru, who had a lot of free time at home, practiced until he'd become fairly skilled. He could play and sing to an 80s folk song without much difficulty. If he introduced that music here, maybe it would take off and the music industry would be revolutionized. Subaru, well, maybe it'll be like it was with mayonnaise. Even though he hadn't considered the implementation of the plan at all, the idea had taken root. In Original World, finding an application for a good idea was often taken for granted. In fact, Subaru had no idea how to begin with it, just like he had no idea how to mass-produce and market mayonnaise. Subaru, playing guitar and telling stories to village kids are both within my skill range. Listen. Liliana, wait, please stop. I can't let a layman play my instrument. If you break it, I can't make a living anymore, huh? You're pretty good. And I've never heard the song before. What is this? As he walked, Subaru surprised Liliana with his folk songs. Like this, they began the walk to the Chamber of Commerce. Beatrice, good grief, I suppose. An exhausted Beatrice trailed after the two, setting her pace to Subaru's melody. The door to the Muse Chamber of Commerce was not particular from the buildings surrounding it. First Street and Second Street separate the residents of Pristella from tourists, and the Chamber of Commerce was located directly between the two. This position was meant to indicate the power of the owner of this building. It was both the innermost and the outermost building, highlighting its uniqueness in an almost exaggerated way. Liliana, this is it, the long-awaited Muse Chamber of Commerce. Springing over with a dance-like motion, Liliana indicated the building in front of her. Although there were taller buildings surrounding it, the four-story Chamber of Commerce seemed to stand incredibly tall. That said, Subaru felt a little regretful. Subaru, I knew it wouldn't look as grand as it had appeared from the entrance of Pristella, but I'm still a little disappointed. It didn't steal my heart the way the Water Plumage Pavilion did. Liliana, the Water Plumage Pavilion, that weirdly shaped place on First Street? If you use that as your basis, even Kiritaka-san will look kind of poor. But, that aside. Liliana swung her body up and down in exaggerated motions, and reached out the palms of her hands. Liliana, now that I've fulfilled our agreement, can you give my lovely instrument back to me? If I don't have it back by tomorrow, then I'm not sure how I'll survive. Subaru, right. Here you go. Subaru had become tired of singing and playing the back-scratcher-shaped instrument halfway to their destination. Liliana hurriedly took it from him, breathing as if in a panic, and checked it for scratches, then began to rub her face against it and gave it a kiss. Liliana, it's good to have you back. I'll never let you go again. Subaru, it's impressive that your attitude can annoy me this much. I think this is the most annoyed I've been at someone's attitude since Betelgeuse. Liliana, I don't know who he is, but he sounds similar to me. Tell me about him. If I ever meet this Betelgeuse-san one day, I can't promise he wouldn't be my enemy. Subaru, he's a Sin Archbishop of the witch cult. Liliana, here he goes again. Stop being such a kidder. That should be your new name. Liliana showered Subaru with an overreaction, but tilted her head at his cold response, and gradually began to assume a serious expression. Liliana, wait, were you serious? Subaru, exactly. You probably won't have many other opportunities to compare yourself to someone who's dead and gone, so make what you will of it. Liliana, wait a minute. At Subaru's words, Liliana objected with amazing momentum. Her reaction surprised Subaru, who wondered if she was angry at being compared to a Sin Archbishop. Her next words threw Subaru off even more. They were. Liliana, what you said just now, why did it sound like you met a Sin Archbishop? Subaru, and if I did? He didn't know what she'd meant to ask, but it was definitely something important. He hadn't expected such a reaction after telling her Betelgeuse' identity as an archbishop. Although, it wasn't impossible that she encountered the poisonous, insect-like witch cult before, since they seemed to appear everywhere. Subaru stiffened up, alert, and Beatrice also paid close attention to the situation, ready to act immediately if need be. One slow reaction, and it would be too late for them. An oppressive feeling atmosphere with two people looking to see how she would react, Liliana spoke. She said. Liliana, are you perhaps the Lalamancer, Natsuki Subaru-sama? Little girl user. Subaru, ugh. Beatrice, ugh, I suppose. Under Liliana's shining gaze, Subaru and Beatrice replied at the same time. Subaru's official title was Amelia's Knight, but that was the one he was known by the least. People often called him the Witch's Knight, one of the many enigmatic characters she was surrounded with. The Knight of the Half-Elf is a mysterious person who always has a little girl with him. Liliana, you were indispensable in slaying one of the three great witch beasts, the White Whale, alongside Duchess Crush Karsten, with the sword demon Wilhelm calling you his benefactor. And then with help from the famous businesswoman Anastasia Sand and the Duchess Crush, you defeated the witch cult's Archbishop of Sloth. And there are unconfirmed rumors that you are also the hero who defeated the sizable hare, which has been plaguing the world for 400 years. Subaru, itchy, 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 itchy. Liliana, what a terrifying reputation. Liliana, with two hands raised, wore the expression of a girl who'd found her dreams as she listed Subaru's merits. Some were accurate, and a few were exaggerated, but he could find no real error in her list. Even so, her words embarrassed him enough for his entire body to itch, while Beatrice wore a seemingly dissatisfied but happy expression. Liliana, and the one who has a little girl who is legendarily skilled in magic following him loyally, you're that Subaru-sama. Aren't you? Beatrice, haha. Betty Subaru will surpass even the most outstanding figures in history, in fact. He will become the brightest star known to man, I suppose. You should respect him more, in fact. Subaru, hey. Beatrice, sticking her nose out proudly, and Liliana, bowing down. The two caused more headaches than any troublemaker, and it seemed like their show at the entrance of the Chamber of Commerce had attracted attention of the staff there. Upon seeing them and finding the kneeling Liliana, they promptly all returned to their work. Subaru, do you always act so exaggeratedly? Everyone here has a strange it's Liliana, as always type expression on their face. Liliana, please stop. Seeing a legend in front of me, my heart is racing. I'm glad to have a chance to witness you in person. Hee. Subaru's previous unease had all but disappeared, but Liliana grew more and more frantic, saliva even dripping from her mouth. Liliana, well, could the people you're meeting with in the Chamber of Commerce really be who I'm thinking of? Subaru, who are you thinking of? Liliana, no, it's just that I've made a lot of songs based on the famous Emilia Tan. I know she's a real person, but in my mind she's always been a fictional character. If it's who I think it is, it's Emilia Tan. Oh, hee. Disregarding Subaru completely, Liliana flew into the Chamber of Commerce. After falling still for one shocked moment, a dumbfounded Subaru could only chase her into the building. Beatrice, Subaru? That girl, she even dropped her instrument, in fact. Subaru, should she really be treating her lifeline like this? Hurriedly grabbing the lute lyre from Beatrice, Subaru ran into Chamber of Commerce. Seeing the reception staff gawking at the upper floor, he deduced that Liliana had just run up the stairs. Receptionist, why you are? Subaru, we're with Emilia-sama, who should be with Kiritaka-san right now. They told you we would be late, right? Receptionist, yes, they're there right now, but Liliana-sama. Subaru, I know the way, can I go up? Seeing the receptionist's stiff nod, Subaru hurried after Liliana. There was no real reason to be in a rush, but the thought of Liliana and Emilia meeting face to face made him uneasy. Or rather, perhaps it would be better to say that their meeting could bring about a troublesome atmosphere. Even more frightening was that Liliana's exceeding strange personality would clash with Emilia's, and Emilia's experience and skill in interaction were overwhelmingly inadequate. Beatrice, Liliana was acting strange, I wonder if she will stay like that. Subaru, I really don't want to think about what will happen if we don't stop her. Registering Beatrice's words, Subaru sped to the third floor. Although he hadn't caught her, he'd saw the back of Liliana's clothing. Now he just had to aim for his goal. Time to show off his parkour skills. Subaru, come on. Flying up the stairs, Subaru began to skip steps entirely, using his hand to do an elegant horizontal rotation, drawing ever closer to Liliana, before finally catching her in front of a room near the staircase. Subaru, Liliana, wait. Liliana, wah. Liliana, who was still salivating, yelled in surprise as Subaru reeled back, gasping for breath. Liliana, oh, you caught up, but I'm not quitting so easily. I'm not giving up. Subaru, if you want to meet Emilia no matter what, I'll ask her for a private meeting, but she's in the middle of a very important meeting right now. Liliana, well. I guess I got a little carried away. Hearing Subaru's serious tone seemed to cool Liliana off a little. She relaxed her shoulders, and Subaru shook his head and handed her the instrument. Liliana, thanks. Subaru, the tool you make a living off of is incredibly important. Don't just throw it away and run. It wouldn't have been surprising if the instrument used by the Songstress had been taken and pawned off. Liliana, don't worry, Kiritaka-san gave it to me. He likes to shop around. Subaru, your sponsor is really not ordinary. Speaking to Subaru with a bitter smile, Liliana held her cherished instrument to her chest. Her expression was one of sincerity and disbelief at being able to abandon it so easily. Since she'd thrown it down for her ambition earlier, Subaru didn't know if he could believe her smile. Liliana, well, I'm fine with saving my meeting with Emilia-sama until later, but first, can I discuss something with Subaru-sama? Subaru, drop that bothersome honorific. Well, what do you want to talk about? Liliana, there's so much. I want to know how accurate the stories are. Not just so I can hear them, but so I can sing about them too. I can write so many songs from that inspiration, maybe even a heroic one that will be passed down for generations. Just thinking about it makes my heart race. Holding out her clenched hand, Liliana's eyes shone with energy. While this puzzling scene was happening, Beatrice finally caught up and stumbled upon Subaru and Liliana's proximity. Beatrice, you, strange girl. Don't stand so close to Subaru, in fact. Move away, I suppose. Liliana, don't worry, it's not that big of a deal. Speaking of which, I also have some questions for the young girl who follows Lalamancer-san. Beatrice, Betty is not a young girl, I suppose. She is a proper lady, in fact. Subaru, you two are so rude, always arguing like that. Shush. Emilia-tan is doing negotiations inside. Beatrice, who was in an awful mood, and Liliana, who didn't realize that she was the cause. Subaru was caught in the middle of their argument, and, in his frustration, inadvertently raised his voice. And, at that moment, Emilia, Subaru? The door opened unexpectedly and Subaru's name was called from the inside. Looking through the open door, Subaru saw what looked like a reception room, where everyone was sitting on a long back chair, looking at him with surprised expressions. Emilia, Otto and Garfield. Sitting opposite of them was a lean-statured young man who was wearing fine-looking clothes. The one who had opened the door was a middle-aged man who was probably with him. Subaru, Emilia-tan. What a coincidence. Emilia, a coincidence? Why were you being so loud? Kiritaka-san? Seeing Subaru making an embarrassed gesture, Emilia wore a look of confusion as she turned to the young man sitting opposite of her, who stood and grabbed something from the table. Then he turned where Subaru was standing. Kiritaka, don't touch my Liliana. Suddenly raising his voice, the young man hurled a glowing blue piece of magic ore. Concentrated pure energy exploded in front of Subaru, whose vision was momentarily engulfed in blue. Seeing it, he faintly registered a thought of wow, how beautiful, before the impact swallowed him. Like that, the first day of formal negotiations broke down. Chapter 10, The Way to the City of Water. Negotiations between Emilia and Kiritaka Muse had proceeded unexpectedly smoothly. Kiritaka, as a businessman, had likely been trying not to show favor to a single royal election candidate. However, Emilia had approached him directly, meaning that this meeting was a rather major event for him. Of course, Emilia, who was taking casual sips of the complimentary tea, had not been thinking of her actions in such a way. Garfield, who was growly steadily addicted to the accompanying desserts, had also not been considering the political ramifications of their actions. It could be said that, in the reception room of Muse Company, the only one who could read Kiritaka was Otto. Kiritaka, I understand that you have come a long way. Please excuse me for being unable to meet you at your convenience. Although I understand that it is disrespectful, due to my position, it is unwise for me to travel freely. In addition, I have become quite attached to this place. Otto, not at all, that's a very reasonable way to think. We're the ones who should be sorry for intruding in your busy schedule. Kiritaka, I will treat whatever you need from me with the utmost priority and care. While exchanging polite greetings, Otto scrutinized the man facing him. The famed Kiritaka Muse was well known even beyond Pristella. His behavior revealed a majestic and stylish image. He was still fairly young, probably somewhere between 25 and 30. His tall, thin body was clad in finely made clothes, and his pale golden hair was meticulously combed to the back of his head. His rather uncomfortable-looking ornaments showed fine taste, and his introverted and concise nature revealed that he was probably highly educated. Otto, as Emilia Camp's head of internal affairs, alongside Roswell, had unknowingly accumulated a rather impressive amount of experience in negotiations. So he immediately judged Kiritaka's attitude to be almost unmatchable. Speaking frankly, Emilia was incredibly fortunate to have Otto with her. If Otto had let Emilia face Kiritaka alone, she would surely be swayed by his skilled rhetoric, and would have ended up overspending on expensive, but ultimately useless things. From the past year, this was the impression Otto had drawn of Emilia. "Kiritaka, may I inquire as to what you need from me? According to Anastasia-san's messenger, what you want is stocked by our company." "Otto, it may be too soon to say so. Actually..." Interrupting Kiritaka, who had begun to address the main topic, Otto looked to Emilia. Emilia was content to leave the negotiations to Otto. Garfield, similarly, maintained his usual attitude, eating desserts while fixing a sharp gaze on one corner of the room, staring at a leisurely-looking figure who was dressed from head to toe in white. In Kiritaka's words, the man in white was present to protect the staff from excessively assertive visitors. "Recently, the world has not been in a peaceful state, so I hope that he can join us." Otto knew of the man in white. It was said that Pristella's Muse company had a mercenary force known as the Scales of the White Dragon, a group which was well known even in Lagunica. This man was probably one of its members. Rumors claimed that their group was one that operated locally, but a few years ago, they formed close ties with Muse company. If those rumors were true, then Kiritaka was the one who had formed an allegiance with them. "Otto, we have a special request. That is, we are looking for a rare type of stone, even by Muse company's standards. We are searching for colorless magic or with outstanding purity. I hope that this is something we can buy from you." Keeping in mind his evaluation that Kiritaka was not someone he could afford to be careless around, Otto stated his request. Playing around with vague terms would be meaningless. After all, Kiritaka had more than likely seen through the true reason for their visit as soon as it had been prepared. And Kiritaka also understood that he could not refuse a direct request from Emilia. "Kiritaka, I see. We do indeed stock magic ore, and we do indeed have some magic ore with a higher grade of quality than those stocked by regular merchants. Emilia-sama, no matter how much colorless ore you want, we are also willing to prepare." "Otto, Kiritaka-san. Please be straightforward with us. We have made our request, colorless magic ore of the highest purity. That is all we need." "Kiritaka, this is rather discourteous." Kiritaka was not simply lacking in straightforwardness. He was merely using a negotiation technique. Despite perfectly understanding Otto's intentions, he casually dropped the names of other goods that he believed would appeal to Emilia. To him, the goods had been marked as sold long before the negotiation had even started. The only remaining question was the matter of the price. "Otto, we are indeed requesting something that may be troublesome for you, so to satisfy the price, we have prepared something that you will find beneficial. Mining rights to magic ore in Elier Forest, part of the Mather's territory which is supporting Emilia-sama. Kiritaka, please do not turn this into the kind of fraud that muddles prices. We are the only formal company that trades raw magical ore, so we cannot consider this proposal. In our line of work, credit is everything to us. I'm sure you would understand, Otto-sama?" Otto gave a silent sigh. It seemed that Kiritaka knew of his origins. The Suwon family's business was nowhere nearly as famous as the Muse family's, but it was hardly unknown. The main players supporting each of the candidates were sure to be heavily investigated along with the candidates themselves. That said, many questions were left unanswered by these investigations, such as Emilia's own origins. Her mysterious background did not win her too many favors. Garfield had lived in Sanctuary his whole life, and Emilia had spent a century frozen in Elier Forest. Both the Lalamancer and his contract spirit were of unknown origin. Thus, Otto, whose identity had easily been discovered, would certainly have it used against him frequently. "Kiritaka, Otto-sama? Your complexion seems to have changed. Are you okay?" "Otto, of course, please don't worry about me. I just thought of something disconcerting, and it made me a little uncomfortable, that's all." Shaking his head at Kiritaka's words, Otto decided to save that unproductive line of thought for later. Once again, he urged that Kiritaka provide a straight answer to his question. Kiritaka took on a meditative attitude. "Kiritaka, of course, we won't refuse to let go of our commodities no matter how much you plead, and of course we are going to follow Emilia-sama's request." "Otto, then." "Kiritaka, however, the magical ore you are requesting is special. In truth, on the occasion when I was first sent to Muse Company in Pristella, the president, that is, my father, gave it to me as a gift. Rather than treating it as a commodity, I prefer to think of its sentimental value. Otto. Regardless of whether the story was true or false, Kiritaka had made a cunning move. Hearing Kiritaka's words, Otto bit his lip. As Kiritaka had said, the extremely rare magic or they were requesting was more than a mere trading commodity. Taking into account the magnitude of Muse Company's transactions, this was too good of an opportunity not to seek an extra profit. So how could the additional value be compensated? Not with commodities but with sentiment. Since the ore was important, that meant it needed to be exchanged for something important. Emilia, I see. I didn't realize it was something so important to you. Emilia's expression reflected that Kiritaka's story seemed to have touched her deeply. Otto could only conclude that Kiritaka wasn't cut out to be an actor, considering how guilty he looked. It takes both action and effort to get your desired result. Otto thought this to himself as he cleared his throat. Otto, I appreciate your kindness. Even so, we still hope to find what we came here for. Kiritaka, I understand. I am a merchant who sells magical ore, and I know that it is better to have it shine in the hands of someone who needs it than to have it sit as a decoration at my home. I am willing to give it to you. There are only a few conditions. Otto, conditions. Let me hear them. Having established that there would be an additional price tag, Kiritaka commenced the real negotiation. After Otto agreed to hear them, Kiritaka held up 3 fingers. What unreasonable conditions would there be? Even thinking about them gave Otto a light stomach pain. Kiritaka, first of all. Muse Company knew that Emilia-sama was seeking this very magical stone. However, in order to keep it out of the hands of malicious people, we have hidden our possession of it. I hope you understand this. Otto, that is only natural. That you tell us this without attempting to hide anything removes all of my suspicion. At first, Kiritaka had denied any past knowledge of the affairs of Emilia Camp. But in order to bring this deal to a successful conclusion, he gave up this knowledge. Kiritaka, then the second one. After the deal has been signed on the line, I want to inform Hoshin Company of our transaction and confirm its legitimacy. Otto, I understand, that is no problem. It seemed there was also a deal between Muse Company and Hoshin Company. It seemed to be intended to semi-publicly reveal that Emilia owed Anastasia a debt. Although it was slightly uncomfortable, it was a legitimate request, so Otto could not refuse. So far, none of the requests would be considered deal-breakers. So, the third request, as soon as he said it, Kiritaka's true intentions would become clear. Otto held back a sigh as Kiritaka waved the third finger in front of him. Kiritaka, third. Avoid all contact with the songstress named Liliana who is currently residing in this city. Otto, huh? Hearing a name suddenly appear of nowhere, Otto froze. Of course, Emilia and Garfield, who were accompanying him, had the same reaction. No, never mind, those two had remained unchanged since the negotiations started. Emilia sipped her tea and Garfield stared at the figure in white. Although they had left all the negotiations to Otto, seeing their blatant lack of participation irked him. Otto, I'm sorry, but I think I may have misheard you. Did you just say to avoid contact with the songstress? Kiritaka, no, there was no misunderstanding there. These conditions are all we ask. If you have any questions, please ask them, and please consider the deal carefully. Otto, if you don't mind, can I ask for the reason? At this point, I can't recall our deal having anything to do with the songstress. Kiritaka, it's not something that necessarily needs to be said. Can you agree to that promise? His tone sinking, for the first time Kiritaka exposed his emotional side. Otto, who could not understand the condition, was lost on what to do. Put simply, the third request passed the horizons of his imagination. Accepting posed no future obstacles to Emilia. Although she may regret not being able to meet the songstress she had discussed with Anastasia, it was hardly important enough to scrap this deal for. That they had so effortlessly come to an agreement was surprising. Otto had not dared to expect that negotiations could have gone so smoothly, although Kiritaka could, at this point, still change his mind. Subaru, who'd been lost halfway, would be here soon, and would certainly turn that matter into something troublesome. Before he arrived, Otto wanted to tie the deal up. Otto, Emilia-sama, is this alright with you? Emilia, I'm a little disappointed, but I guess it can't be helped. Having earned a confirmation from Emilia, Otto agreed to the deal. Kiritaka was satisfied to accept this commitment, and the most stressful part of the negotiation came to an end. Now, they could discuss the actual monetary price, and maybe pick up a few small items. Kiritaka, there are a few other quality goods that you may be interested in, would you like to see? Kiritaka stood to retrieve a wooden chest from a shelf. The chest, having been placed on the table, emitted a glow as it opened, dazzling Otto and Emilia. Inside of it were all sorts of magical stones, carefully arranged on cushions, the most radiant of which was the colorless, transparent one. This was the colorless stone that Emilia had been pursuing. Kiritaka, would you like to inspect it? At Kiritaka's words, Emilia raised her head. She nodded, then stretched her nervous fingers toward the stone. But at that moment, Garfield, Emilia-sama. Man in white, young master. Simultaneously, the two guards called to their respective master. They turned to look at each other, and then to face their surprised master. Garfield, THSA too loud and annoying something coming. Man in white, there seems to be the sound of footsteps coming from downstairs. Allow me to go investigate. He strode soundlessly toward the door as Garfield tensed his body. The sound of the disturbances drew closer, until they seemed to be right in front of the door. You two are so rude, always arguing like that. Shush. Emilia-tan is inside, doing serious negotiations. The voice was an incredibly familiar one. As this thought was shared by three people in the room, the man in white opened the door of the reception room, revealing a familiar scary face. With a petite girl on either side of him, this man, Subaru, was truly worthy of the title of Lawmancer. Emilia, Subaru? Hearing Emilia's call, a pale Subaru finally noticed the presence of everyone else. At that moment, Otto wanted to complain, but he decided to observe everyone else's reactions first and held back. And so, Subaru held up his hands and smiled weakly. Subaru, Emilia-tan. What a coincidence. Emilia, a coincidence? Why were you being so loud? Kiritaka-san? Hearing Emilia's surprise, Otto's own reaction was also delayed. Kiritaka reached a hand into the wooden chest of magic stones and glared at Subaru with a gaze bordering on frantic. He clutched a blue pure magical stone and... Kiritaka, don't touch my Liliana. Accompanying his frantic cry was a thrown magical stone. Without anyone to stop him, the stone arched toward Subaru and knocked his body away in a blue explosion. Man in white, my apologies for that embarrassing spectacle. The young master is usually calm, but if matters involve Liliana-san, he quickly flies into a rage. I will try to calm him down, but for today, let's end negotiations here. After the commotion died down, the middle-aged man in white acted as the mediator who had to calm down both sides. He bowed his head with an apology. Kiritaka's frantic voice could still be heard from the closed door behind him. That scene was unsuitable for outsiders, so the members of Emilia camp had been ushered out of the room. Liliana, Kiritaka-san is really troublesome, even taking away my chance to speak to Emilia-sama and Subaru-sama. Ugh, I'm so annoyed, ugh. Liliana's anger, on the other hand, was also endless. Speaking in an angry huff, she announced that she'd come up with a new song titled The Avant-Garde Master of Life and Death, causing Beatrice to furrow her brow. Man in white, Liliana-chan, please forgive the young master. Liliana, I understand. Although it took a long of time to understand, Liliana had finally been talked down. Subaru's interference had rendered a smooth-sailing negotiation utterly fruitless. Subaru, in other words, Liliana is a rabid fangirl and is obsessed with us. Kiritaka knew and wanted to keep us from stealing her. That was the point of the third condition? Otto, and just as I was about to have the deal tied down, Natsuki-san had to come ruin everything. I finally understand now. Does having you around do any good for anyone? Subaru, I acknowledge that this was my fault, but who would have thought that after getting seasick things would turn out like this? That's hardly something I had any control over. Otto could not hide his dissatisfaction at the result of the negotiations. Subaru spoke lightly, but he was also hardly satisfied, having taken a blow from Kiritaka's magical stone, and realizing that negotiations tomorrow would be incredibly difficult based on Kiritaka's angry tone. Emilia, please don't be so angry, Otto-kun. Subaru didn't do this on purpose, these things just happen sometimes. Subaru, that's right. Keep going, Emilia-tan. Emilia, Subaru, I also have something to say to you. You shouldn't have been so loud with Liliana-san today. We were the guests there, so we definitely troubled them a lot. Subaru, yes, I'm sorry. Subaru bowed his head in an apology, and Emilia nodded a very good. Otto gave a helpless sigh as he watched his master's hopeless attitude. Otto, anyway, today's negotiations have ended here, so we should be getting back to the water plumage pavilion. However, I have something to attend to first. So, I'll meet back with everyone later. Subaru, something to attend to? At his unexpected words, everyone turned to Otto, who gestured in the general direction of News Company's headquarters. Otto, we've gone out of our way to come to the faraway Pristella, so I'd like to take the time to improve relationships here. Although, as for today, it is only necessary for me to go. There may come a day when Emilia-sama may need to come. If that ever happens, I'll have to trouble you, Emilia-sama. Emilia, yeah, I understand. But why am I not needed today? Otto, if you show up unannounced, they may be unable to sufficiently welcome you. We need to be considerate about where you go. Emilia, yes. I understand. I'll keep it in mind. After hearing the Emilia's reply, Otto gave a please go home promptly, as if speaking to a group of children, then disappeared into the depths of 2nd Street. As for Garfield, although he wanted to accompany Otto, he was rejected with please prioritize Emilia-sama. Emilia, so Subaru, what were you talking about with Liliana-san? Subaru? Is Emilia-tan concerned about me talking to other girls? I wonder. I'm glad to see this subtle change. Emilia, no. Don't worry, I just want to see what kind of a person the Songstress is. It's okay even if you misunderstand though. Subaru, is it better for me to misunderstand here? Emilia, as always, naturally and mercilessly cut into Subaru's heart. But in any case, she gave Subaru a reason to chat with her, so he began to recount his earlier experience. Subaru, at first, when we encountered her in the park, I thought her song was super powerful. It was an astounding performance, even as the Songstress. Right, Biko? Beatrice, I won't deny this point, in fact. I don't deny it, I suppose. Emilia, Beatrice looked so distressed, what happened? Subaru, talent in one area comes at the price of competence in others. Liliana perfectly showcased the meaning of that. Subaru could fully understand Beatrice's distress. Liliana poured her heart and soul into music, and became a rather pitiful girl. Subaru, in short, rather than striving to be an extremely talented person in one area, you should strive to be a mildly successful person all around. Garfield, th is pretty philosophical, Captain. Sayin' her sing and make people think that, muse ve been amazing. Subaru, I won't deny it. Speaking of which, meeting Liliana was worth coming up with that conclusion. Everyone decided to return to the inn by foot. If they were to take the waterways again, then Subaru would become seasick again, which would mean leaving him behind. Emilia, like Otto-kun said, it wasn't easy for us to come here, so I want to take a walk and appreciate these beautiful streets. Rather than having Subaru feel guilty that they were walking for his benefit, Emilia phrased her reasoning as a cute request. Subaru had no complaints and Garfield and Beatrice did not object. Subaru, if I hadn't been able to accompany Emilia-tan back to the inn, I would have gone mad with worry. Beatrice, you don't need to worry, in fact. If we get into trouble, then Betty will place her left hand on a wall, I suppose. Subaru, I think I've already told you about the defects of that method. Garfield, Y2 don't need to worry, you've got my amazing self's nose. Whether's the smell F the inn or th smell F that midget devil, my amazing self remembers it. Subaru, heh. Noticing that Garfield used Mimi's scent as an example, Subaru unconsciously gave a malicious chuckle. The little kitten's reaction to Garfield, though surprising and puzzling, was probably nothing other than goodwill. Plus, they were of similar age. Subaru thought they made a rather good match. Incidentally, Garfield was still the same, wanting to dedicate himself to Ram. And Ram just regarded Garfield as a little brother, nothing more. Subaru, in any case, Garfield. You're my little bro, so as a big brother I'm praying for your success in love. Garfield, WH say some all touchy-feely, Captain? Well, why make an M feel sick? Subaru wore an expression of I understand as he patted Garfield on the shoulder. Garfield cocked his head and laughed, exposing his sharp-toothed grin. Subaru hoped from the bottom of his heart that the kind, well-intentioned Garfield would find happiness. Emilia, this is really a nice city. Everything seems so fresh and the people here look so happy. I can't help but feel excited. Their surroundings seemed to delight Emilia, and, seeing her expression, Subaru felt happy as well. She did have a point though. The architecture in the city must have taken a great effort to design, and everything functional seemed to serve as artwork. The icing on the cake was, of course, Pristella's beautiful waterways which doubled as transportation. Subaru, although the city was built like this, the origins of the design are unknown. Emilia, apparently its construction pushed the limits of technology at the time, because it had something to do with keeping dangerous beasts trapped inside the city. But that doesn't change its beauty, right? Emilia stopped at a bridge overlooking the waterway and smiled. Subaru, overtaken by the mood, nodded as if to declare, yeah. For whatever reason, Subaru had arrived here, at this point. The results that he'd earned, and the results he was reaching for, as long as they could be reached, nothing else mattered. Because the most important part of anything was not the beginning, but the end. Subaru, that's what you said, Mom. Subaru, you mean, if the results read good then everything's okay? Emilia, just now, what did you say? Subaru, I just remembered the magical words that the woman I respect most in the world said to me. The days of those memories were long gone, but even so, Subaru had gained so much courage from them. It would be impossible to forget them, because the lesson he'd learned from them was something that could not be forgotten. Natsuki Subaru, today, lived with those memories inside him. Seeing Subaru and Emilia's shared laughter, Garfield and Beatrice waited on the side. Those two were occupied in their own world, and no one could interrupt them. Even Beatrice recognized this point. Beatrice, he has such a foolish expression on that face of his, in fact. Garfield, when's a man share in such a good mood the woman he like, course he'll act that way. My amazing self's relieved. Looks the captain's a man. Beatrice, I wonder what that means, I suppose. Garfield, no, Jace that captain surrounds himself with girls too small and too many men. Supposin' he weren't close Emilia-sama, a misunderstanding might happen. Beatrice, Subaru is a masculine man, in fact. He's both a man and a pervert, I suppose. He's always willing to randomly touch Betty and Petra, I suppose. Garfield, ths not really nice way to vouch for him, yeah? The two talked at length about Subaru's preferences, and about his reputation of touching girls younger than him. Subaru and Emilia, satisfied with their view of the city of water, did not even hear the irrational dialogue taking place behind them. Emilia, well then, it's about time to go back. Plus, I kinda want to admire the inn again. Its shape was so odd but interesting. Subaru, Wafu-style architecture. I also want to see it again, although for different, less charitable reasons than Emilia-tan. Wafu is. Emilia, is that so? Haha, then, we should hurry. Emilia withdrew her hand from the railing, and took a few steps backward with an excited smile. Because she was feeling a bit impatient, she didn't take the time to confirm that there was no one behind her. Emilia, whoops. She backed right into a man with a hood who was passing them by. She stumbled slightly, and the man reached out to steady her. Emilia, I am sorry. I wasn't looking behind me. Subaru, sorry from me too. This child, she's so troublesome. I'll be sure to scold her. A flustered Emilia apologized to the man wearing in the hood. Subaru joined her side and bowed his head to the man. He took care not to call Emilia's name, taking the precaution of keeping people from realizing who she was and causing a commotion in the streets. Of course, the hood that Emilia wore was one that hindered recognition. So, if they made only slight contact with someone, it wouldn't develop into a huge problem. This time included. This time, I was the careless one. After all, I was a little distracted by you. Subaru, distracted? The miss that I just bumped into has the silver hair of a beautiful girl, doesn't she? A girl I once wanted to marry had that same hair. Remembering that hair, I didn't avoid you in time. His remark should have seemed urgent, but his voice sounded rather slow and intoxicated. Judging from his voice, the man, dressed in a long robe of the man sounded fairly young. Hearing him mention marriage, Subaru froze, and immediately judged him as a man who he didn't want near Emilia. Subaru, well, we can consider this a fault from both parties. Since we've conveyed our apologies, we can both move on now. Emilia, wait, Subaru. That was a kind of an insincere and apathetic apology. Subaru, that's fine, no? Emilia. Subaru wanted Emilia to leave, and Emilia herself seemed lost for words. Seeing their behavior, the man in the hood slowly shook his head. I don't mind. I don't place any anger or blame on you. If you want to leave, feel free to leave. If we are to meet again, fate will provide us with another opportunity. Subaru, that's very true. Well then, maybe fate will guide us to a future meeting. Accepting the man's poetic farewell, Subaru responded similarly and left with Emilia's hand in his. Subaru stole a quick glance at her. In that moment, for reasons unknown to him, Emilia wore a meaningful expression as she glanced over her shoulder at the man they just left. Subaru, sure, my attitude wasn't great, but I wanted to protect my Emilia-tan and get her away from that strange guy. Emilia, HM? Right. I genuinely didn't think Subaru's attitude was very nice, since it was my mistake, but that wasn't what I was thinking about. Stopping here, Emilia's eyes reflected her confusion. However, with a meditative expression and quivering lips, she continued. Emilia, that person just now, I feel like I've met him before, that's how I felt, but since his face was hidden, I couldn't be sure. Subaru, someone Emilia-tan knows? Well, I should probably know them as well. Emilia, but I don't know. Who was he? Probably because it was still bothering her, Emilia turned around once more. But the figure had disappeared, and she had no idea where he'd gone. Garfield, yo, Captain. Why lookin' nervous clinging to Emilia-sama's hand? Was you afraid someone gonna steal her? Seeing Subaru and Emilia emerging from the bridge, Garfield approached them, and Subaru stuck his tongue out at him. Subaru, idiot, this is no time for games. If there's some strange guy hanging around, you have to show up to help. If it's an opponent that I can't handle, then Amelia Tan would be in danger. Garfield, suppose if that happened, then you'd protect R with your life. THSW makes TH Captain a man. Subaru, if I acted as a shield then maybe I could take one hit. Then if the enemy kept going, we'd be in trouble. I have no confidence in my endurance. Both physically and mentally. Hearing Subaru's humble evaluation of himself, Garfield laughed. He doubtlessly believed that Subaru was just humble, but to Subaru, it was indeed a proper evaluation. It was perhaps better to say that Garfield overestimated Subaru. Garfield, no cause to worry. If my amazing self thinks some bastards tryin' to attack ya, they'll be sent flyin', no doubt about t. Sides, guy did and move like knew how to fight. Was just an regular guy, 1 did and no martial arts. Subaru, you can tell that? Garfield, just by lookin'. CN also tell Captain likes to swing swords round. My amazing self could tell soon as why moved your wrists. Subaru, really? That sounds like some kind of magic trick. Subaru had never told Garfield of his high school experience with kendo. Subaru had already realized that his so-called skill would be of no use in this world. But his exercise bore traces, which the knowledgeable practitioners of this world could apparently see. Subaru, having said that, are you still worried, Amelia Tan? Subaru put his thoughts to one side and spoke to Amelia, who was still gazing around, before giving up with a shake of her head. Amelia, it's okay. Sorry to trouble you. Let's go back. Subaru, well, when we get back, make sure to hug Mimi for a while to make you feel better. Oops, I'll be hugging you though, Biko, so there's no need to be worried. Beatrice, Betty hasn't said anything yet, I suppose. Hearing Beatrice's complaints and Subaru's proud expression, Amelia laughed. Then, covering her mouth, she replied. Amelia, that's true, holding Mimi does seem to be very comforting. I'll be sure to do that. As Amelia spoke, she checked her surroundings once again, then dropped her uneasy gaze in exchange for a smile. I see. Now I understand the meaning. A man spoke into the cuff of his coat, the man in the hood from earlier. Recalling the girl he'd just come in contact with, his mouth curled into a smile that gave of a miserable feeling. I went out of my way to come here. If it had been for nothing then I couldn't let it go as if nothing had happened. Since this is a special reward, this is another matter. The words themselves were mild, but the voice which had announced them was feverishly sticky. It was as though the feeling had been cooked in a sticky pot, and then had been left out under the sun and the moon. The feeling held that kind of unpleasantness. I will never let go of anything I own, and I want what I own to be perfectly suited for me. Since I am perfect, I have to be continually satisfied. So, feeling a vacancy would, of course, be unsatisfying. The man spoke as he raised his head. At that moment, his hood fell, revealing white hair. With the wind swaying his white hair, the slightly unhappy man announced. I must make her my 79th wife, to satisfy that vacancy. In the City of Water, the white-haired devil spoke in a voice full of derision. End of chapter 5 to 10, Watergate City Pristella.